everyone. Thanks for coming. So this is the talk is about recent advances in self-supervised learning from video and audio. And I will talk about 4 different topics. The first one will be masked autoencoders for learning from video. The second one will be learning from masked features. The third one will be learning from audio and video information, also in this masked learning framework. And the fourth one will be a new hierarchical transformer that is simpler and faster than previous ones. So this is the outline of the talk. And the first part, I will talk about masked autoencoders as spatiotemporal learners. This is work that has been published at NeurIPS in December. And the code is also online at the website shown here. So what is the main motivation for this work for masked autoencoding? The main motivation is also coming from actually the language domain, where BERT pre-training or mask pre-training is very common, and it's a very standard approach where the idea is to mask specific words in the text, and then you try to predict these as a self-supervised pre-training task. And masked autoencoders were like a visual version of that, where you block out specific regions at the input, as you can see here, and then your self-supervised training objective is to predict these missing regions with a model. Now, this is masked autoencoders. Now, the work I'm talking about is masked autoencoders for learning from video information. And if we think about video information, we talk about a spatiotemporal input. And the input consists of a height and a width, and also of a temporal duration. So HW and T stands for these dimensions. And the idea of this work is very simple. So we take the input, which is a short clip of 4 seconds of video, and then we send, we first randomly mask out a large fractions of patches of this input. So these are small cubes that you can think of. You remove a large fraction of those, so like around, let's say 80–90%. The rest of the information, the visible tokens, are then sent into an encoder. The encoder is then, for example, a transformer of several layers, learning to embed and learn like representations of these tokens. And then at the next stage, there is the decoder. And for the decoder, the input is actually these encoded visible tokens, which are the randomly visible patches at the input, plus set of learnable tokens, which represent the non-visible part of the input. And then the decoder is another smaller transformer than the encoder that tries to predict the RGB values of these missing input regions. So that is the main idea. It's very simple. And in this work, we study several aspects. The main approach how we do this is we first pre-train with this task, with the self-supervised task of predicting the masked out regions. And then we fine-tune just this encoder part here on downstream tasks. So what we study in this work are several aspects, and a few interesting ones are the following. So we look at how can we mask this input. So like, what is the best way of masking out the input? One way to do it is to just randomly mask out spatiotemporally the input clip. And again, here, what we do is we pre-train with this masked autoencoding objective, and then the final task that we care about here is Kinetics 400 video classification. The metric is classification accuracy that is shown in this table here, and the model that we train is a VIT, a vision transformer, large size. We pre-train for 800 epochs, and then we fine-tune for 100 epochs. The pre-training is basically this masked autoencoding task. The fine-tuning is just supervised fine-tuning. So what we see is in this ablation that agnostic masking, which is this one, which just randomly masks in space and time, works the best. And we can use a very high masking ratio. Here we use 90% masking ratio. So this pre-training is very efficient because the larger encoder only needs to work on 10% of the visible tokens. Then we also look at space-only masking, which means we mask out a consecutive spatial region over time. Then we also look at time-only masking, which can be seen as like seeing separate frames of the input and masking out other frames. So you can think of this also like a future or past prediction tasks from a few frames. And then another version we try is blockwise masking, which masks out larger consecutive chunks of the input. What we find is that this random masking works better than the other variants. Especially, we can use a very high masking ratio, which does not work well if we use these other variants. And high masking ratio means more efficient pre-training. So we did ablate this masking ratio for the agnostic masking scenario here. And what you can see is on the horizontal axis, the training epochs. So the longer you train, the higher the accuracy. Vertical axis is accuracy. And as you can see, actually a higher masking ratio is beneficial. So when you increase this masking ratio, which are these different lines here, you can get better downstream performance. And we think the main reason is because you have a higher masking ratio, this pre-training task is more challenging, which leads to more richer feature representations that are trained. So by default in the paper, we use 90%, but 95% also works quite well when you train long enough. And this is very efficient because you only need to process the 5% or the 10% of remaining tokens in your encoder. So we applied also this speed up in this graph here. What you can see here is horizontal axis is the wall clock training time. So this is the full training duration plus fine tuning. And horizontal axis is this accuracy again. So what you see here in the blue curve is training from scratch. That means you just train supervised on this data set for 400 epochs, and you get to a final accuracy of around 73% testing. Now, if you use 71%. So if you use MAE, you get a very significant boost in accuracy. It goes to 84.4%. 13% more test accuracy. This is this green line here. And what you can see, you just not only get a very big boost in accuracy, you also have much faster training because the pre-training is very efficient because it's sparse, just using this 10% of the tokens in the encoder. You can pre-train for 800 epochs in shorter amount of time, and then you fine-tune for 100 epochs. This is the supervised part. And as you can see, the fine-tuning accuracy goes up much quicker than the train from scratch accuracy, showing the efficiency of this, efficacy of this pre-training. So this is the speed up. So now this is all when you train on the same data set without the labels, kinetics, and then you fine tune on the same data set again. So of course you can mix the pre-training data and the fine-tuned data. So this is what we look at next in this work. Here we look at the influence of this pre-training data. So again, the first is training from scratch, kinetics 400, 71%. Then you can pre-train supervised, of course, on this data set as well, without MAE. And then this is the same in that case, but you can also use that for downstream tasks. In this case, we use two other data sets. AVA is a spatiotemporal action detection data set, and something is another action classification data set. And these would be classification accuracies and mean average precision for AVA on these downstream tasks. Now, if you use this MAE pre-training, again, you get a large boost in accuracy, like shown before, 13% on kinetics, 10% MAP on AVA, and also a large gain here on something. This is if you pre-train on this kinetics data set, which has 240,000 videos in the training set. Now, we also tried larger versions of this kinetics data set, kinetics 600. You can see a slight increase in accuracy for around 1% on these transfer learning data sets. We also tried kinetics 700, which we show here. We don't show that for kinetics 400 because there is a train test overlap. And then finally, another thing we tried in this work was pre-training on uncurated data. So for this one, we use a set of 1 million Instagram videos that are just randomly taken from the web. And interestingly, we saw that this also works quite well for pre-training. And that is actually a quite promising signal that one can use just random web video to pre-train. It doesn't need to be curated like kinetics is, for example, with a balanced class distribution. And actually that even worked better for the AVA case here. Okay, so this is the main overview of that work. And now I want to show some qualitative results. Actually, what is this pre-training learning? How can we look at that? So for this, here are original videos. These would be the full videos that the model actually is not seeing. Then this would be what the model is seeing after it's trained, or it's trained with this kind of information. So these are validation videos. The model has not seen it during training, by the way. So this is when you've masked out 98% of the input. Now, this is what the model actually predicts at the output, which we've just seen these few 2% of the patches at the input. And the same you can also do for a lower masking ratio of 95%. And with just seeing 5% of the input, the model can predict this. So this is suggests that the model is learning a quite rich information or representation that can actually reason about what is happening here, because it doesn't really see much about this tennis player, for example, but it can quite well reconstruct the motion of the tennis racket and so on, with just seeing a little bit of the input. So now I show a few more examples. This would be the masked input for 98% masking, 95% masking. And this is what the model can predict out of that. Sorry about that. And this would be the output for when the model sees 5% of the input. And this is the original input. Now here's another example, 98% mask, 95%. And this is the output. So the model can already guess quite well how this person is moving in this dancing example. And if it sees more, it can even guess better. This would be the original. Here's one more example. One more here, for example, you can see that the model is not seeing this person here. It's shown on the left side here. So it's not reconstructing it in this case. And here it is showing it. So if the model doesn't see something, obviously cannot guess that something is happening there. And that is the last example. And here what's interesting is that the model is like on the top predicting there is some kind of text written all over the video, even though the model does not see that it's like written all over the video, but it's like maybe has seen similar cases in the training set that can imagine like there is a text written here. And as you can see here, it just predicts text all over on the horizontal, whereas the text is not fully covering everything. Okay, so this was masked autoencoders for learning from video. Next, I want to very briefly talk about a work that we did concurrently with MAE, where we actually predicted not just the pixels of the input, but actually some features from other models or some other feature representations. So the main idea for this work was that we, when we think about vision versus language, where this mask prediction idea actually is coming from, is that language is actually very sparse, it's very discrete, and it's semantically quite rich. So one word can have a lot of meaning. But in comparison to this, think about one pixel, it doesn't contain a lot of information. Pixels are continuous, high dimensional, and there is not so much information captured in single pixels, but in larger regions of images. There is. So the idea was that we can actually predict different quantities with this masked autoencoding framework. And what we tried in this work was 5 different types of features. What we found that works quite well was histogram of oriented gradients. This hawk feature, which is like a popular feature that you might know if you've been around in computer vision for many years before deep learning. So this hawk feature is like, it was used as a descriptor for recognition tasks and many other tasks, for example, for pedestrian detection. And what it does, it's just using a gradient filter like a Sobel or edge filter, and then it's histogramming the gradient orientation in local regions. And it's histogramming these based on the gradient strength or magnitude. And it looks like this for an image, for example, if you visualize it. So in this work that we did like concurrently with MAE, we found that this hog actually works better than if, so first we tried predicting pixels. And for the baseline that I show here, this is an older baseline on ImageNet. We saw that like when we did this for pixel prediction, we got like a 0.7% accuracy increase on ImageNet. And the pipeline is similar like before, you pre-train and then you fine tune. And what we saw is if we use this hog feature, we get actually a bigger gain. So the hog feature was giving us like a 1.8% gain over the baseline. And we were thinking, why does it work better than pixels? We were not so sure. We tried to look into some samples where, for example, the pixel prediction makes a large error on the validation set. One example is this one, where the left part here is masked out input. What the model predicts is this one here. And you can only consider predictions in these regions. You can ignore these gray areas actually. And what you see here is it's predicting a red balloon, which is a valid prediction, but the real image is a blue balloon. So the actual loss is quite high in the color space. And if you look at the histogram of anti-gradient, for example, it does not make this big prediction error. So maybe this dealing with color ambiguity is like an advantage that the hog descriptor can deal with better than if you just predict pixels as a pre-training task. Colors. Another thing might be if you think about textures. What you see here is like the prediction for this masked out region here in the pixel space. It's quite blurry. It doesn't really capture what is here. But the hog prediction for the same input looks like this. So it's like capturing this texture details about this object or this, yeah. So we did some ablations and figured that what is important in this hog descriptor, if you remove it, when do you lose most performance? And I think the main significant bit of this ablation is that contrast normalization is the most important one. So if you change the orientation bins of this hog descriptor, it doesn't change much of performance. If you change the spatial size of these cells, it doesn't make much difference. The main difference is really contrast normalization. If you remove that, you drop more than 1% accuracy. And interestingly, there is also a contrast normalization in the MAE approach, which is quite similar to this. So this work was done concurrently with MAE. MAE also has a contrast normalization that is quite important. It's like a 1–2% gain in performance. So this is about the histogram of oriented gradients. Then we also tried a few other kinds of representations to predict with masked autoencoding in this work. One is predicting visual tokens from a discrete VAE autoencoder that is trained off the shelf before that. That seemed to work a little bit worse, but we didn't tune for that. There are other works that did that as well, like VEIT. And then we also tried deep features. So that's like the advanced version of this hog descriptor. If you think, for example, we tried dyno features and MoCo features, so momentum contrast. So these are self-supervised learned representations. And these actually work even better than this histogram of oriented gradient features. And that was quite interesting. And I think there were quite a few works following up this trend of predicting features, for example, from CLIP-based models with masked autoencoders. Okay, and one more thing that we tried was using supervised networks instead of these unsupervised trained networks from dyno or MoCo. And this, interestingly, does not work well. So there is kind of a performance drop again if you try to predict supervised features from a ResNet or VIT base trained on ImageNet. So this is about predicting features instead of raw pixel values for masked autoencoding. And next, so this is the second part of the talk. Next, I want to talk about actually predicting a completely other modality with masked autoencoding, which is predicting audio. So this work was also done and presented at NeurIPS in December. It's about basically learning audio representations in a very similar way with masked autoencoders. So how does it work? It's actually very simple. So the input is a the input is a waveform, just a raw audio waveform that is first converted into a spectrogram representation. Spectrogram is just a short-term Fourier transform that is basically having two axes. One is the frequency, one is the time dimension. And this spectrogram is then fed into a visual VIT kind of transformer. So basically, it's very similar to the image case. But before we feed it into this VIT encoder, we actually mask out, similar as for image MAE, specific random regions on the input. So we randomly drop patches of these spectrograms. Then we encode it with this transformer again. We get our encoded features, and then we add these learnable positional embeddings, so to say, and these represent the masked inputs. And these are then passed to the decoder that then tries to predict these missing regions. And the loss is just a mean square error loss between the predicted spectrogram patches and the original patches. So this is the training objective. It's very similar to an image version of masked autoencoders. We do pre-train again on a very big data set, audio set, which has about 2 million of short recordings of audio. It also has videos, but we don't use the video information in this work. Here are some details, and we ablate or basically evaluate the model by fine-tuning on a set of standard benchmarks for audio classification. So what we look into this work first was again this masking, and how can we do the masking in the audio domain? How would it be different from the image case? And what we look at here are different ways of masking. This is the original input, and then we can do unstructured masking, similar as in the video case. We randomly mask time and frequency dimensions. Then we can do temporal masking, which means we slice out different temporal parts of the spectrogram. We can do frequency masking, which is doing a similar thing just in the frequency domain. And then we combine these two, randomly mask out time and frequency components. And in this work, we actually did that for the pre-training and for the fine-tuning. So we ablate this down here in these two graphs. If you do it for the pre-training on the left part here, we found also that this unstructured masking worked best, which just randomly masked out regions of the input spectrogram. And we can also use a quite high masking ratio of like 0.8. And it works better than this more structured kind of masking. And then when we did the fine-tuning ablations, we found that actually this time plus frequency masking, which is the green curve here, works better than no masking at all, which would be 0.0 here. So we see that during fine-tuning, this also helps. This masking is like a regularization. It's similar to cutout augmentation, for example, on images for supervised learning. And it also helps to accelerate the fine-tuning, because when you drop these patches at the input, you don't need to encode them. So it also accelerates in terms of the training speed. So then I don't want to go too much into detail about the evaluation here. It's just showing this works quite well on various tasks, which are shown here. I rather want to show some examples audio ME. So here again, I show, or actually, yeah, I play sounds of what the masked input would be. Or maybe not in Zoom, maybe here, right?
Yeah, you have to choose the audio output.
Yeah,
this one, like
this
headphones,
one.
and you have this now.
Okay. I hope it works on Zoom. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the masked version. It's like 80% is removed of the spectrogram. Sorry, that was maybe a bit too loud. So this is what the model can produce. There's someone talking. This is the original.
And then put the nut inside up here and do it correct. So you can push it down and it'll correct it, doesn't it?
So the model can already like reconstruct something that's reasonable, I think. Maybe another example. Okay, and this is what the model can produce. That was the original sound. One more example. That's the original one. Okay, maybe this one, last one. Okay, that's the last one. And you can see here in the spectrogram, it can produce a very interesting structure already because maybe it has seen similar samples in the training set. And that's the original. Okay, so this was learning audio information with audio MAE. And these two works that I've shown before, video MAE and audio MAE, they were both at NeurIPS. And of course, one can then ask, what if you do both at the same time? That was a more newer work that we put out on arXiv recently, which is basically combining the two ideas where we train a model from audio and video with masked autoencoding. And this model looks complex, so I will try to go into it slowly and in more detail. So the first thing you can do is if you have this audio autoencoding and video autoencoding, you can combine it in this naive form, right? Where you just add a fusion part that is fusing these two representations. And then you have a decoder for each modality. And then you would do reconstructing pixel information and audio information in the spectrograms. So this is one naive version that we try. And then the more advanced version that we try is this one that we called masked audio video learners. And what we do here is we actually have an alignment loss that is a contrastive loss between audio and video information. When I say video, I mean just the RGB information. And we also have a kind of mask feed similar feature prediction objective. So we don't predict raw RGB and spectrogram information. We actually predict contextualized features that are not locally just seeing one patch, but more from a neural network. And I will go into that on the next slide. So the first thing I'm talking about is this aligned representation that we try to learn. And the alignment is done by contrastive loss. So what we have is two contrastive losses. One is a within modality loss and one is a cross modality loss. So when you look here, this would be the audio part of the network, the audio stream. What we do is we separate the patches into two views. So we take half of these non-masked patches, we send them through the encoder, we take the other half, we send it through the encoder, and then we have a contrastive loss that enforces the similarity of these patches from the same modality and contrasts it with other audio patches in the training batch. So it's similar to a sim-clear kind of loss, where you try to have two views of the same modality, and then you maximize the representation similarity between these two views and contrast it with other views from the same modality. So this happens in the visual and in the audio domain. So audio domain here, visual domain here. And then we have one more loss that is across modalities. And this loss tries to pull together the representations from the same input sample. So for example, it takes the visual features and the audio features from the same input. It maximizes similarity of these, of the patches here, of these encoded patches. And then it tries to contrast it, pushing away representations from other videos, from audio and from video. So basically two contrastive losses, they are working across and within the modalities. And then this should generate more aligned audiovisual representations. The second self-supervised loss is that we will predict not raw RGB and spectrogram information, but we actually predict features that come from this network trained in a previous stage. So what we do is we train it like this on the raw RGB and spectrogram information. Then we use the model again in a like self-training framework to train on the features produced by this network. So how does that work? Again, first, we just do this contrastive objective and raw reconstruction objectives that reconstructs the RGB values and the spectrograms. And then we have a second stage where we regress actually the features produced by that network. So we use the same network, we freeze it, which is shown here. We don't backpropagate into that part. We take the inputs, full view inputs, through the audio and video encoder, and then the model is actually trying to predict these features. And this is similar like before in this mask feed work, where you would use an external network like Dino or Moco for the learning part. And you can do this actually multiple times. So we do that 3 times. You can do this training a model, then using the features of that model and do it again, and do it again. And it helps every time. So for this work, we do a pre-training on the same data set. As said before, this audio set data set also has actually videos and not just audio information. It's quite large scale. We don't use the labels for the pre-training part. And then we fine-tune on a variety of downstream classification and retrieval benchmarks for audiovisual retrieval classification. So now in the ablation studies, one can start with this audio video MAE baseline. And what is shown here is the classification performance on the downstream data set when you just use the audio encoder. So you just take the audio encoder after pre-training and then you fine tune it on that data set. And then what is shown here is just taking the video modality, video encoder, which video refers to RGB visual information, and then you fine tune it. As you can see, this data set is audio heavy, so audio is better. Audio produces 36% classification accuracy and video just 17. Now, the first thing we can do is jointly train it. This means we add this fusion encoder before we do the RGB value and the spectrogram prediction. So if you add this fusion before doing the prediction, it already helps slightly, so like 0.4 mean average precision. The next thing you can do is these two contrastive objectives. First is this inter-contrast, which is across modalities. So trying to pull together two representations from audio and from video and pushing apart these from other videos and audios. And the second one is this within modality loss, which is basically pulling together different views of audio information or visual information from the same input and pushing apart other views from other input samples. So these two losses help quite a lot and improve accuracy by 2.2 MAP and 4.5 MAP on the video side. And note that actually there is no video used in this audio classifier in the downstream fine-tuning, and other way around as well. Like there is no audio used in this video classifier. So using the audio during pre-training actually helps the visual representation and vice versa. And then you can do this multi-stage training where you try to not predict the raw RGB and spectrogram information, but you actually predict the features of the same model trained in the previous stage. And you do this 2-3 times. So, so these are the main ablations. And then we again evaluate on these data sets, 3 different ones: audio set, 20K, 2 million, VGG sound. And there's a lot of numbers here, but mainly the main message is that the whole framework helps both for audio only classification, for video only classification, and if you combine the two, so you take the both encoders and you fine tune them on audio and video, it also works quite well compared to previous work. In the paper, we also show qualitative results for how it would look like, what the model produces. It's very similar to the audio and video only results that I showed before, just that the model can do it in both modalities at the same time. So this is the work that jointly trains audiovisual representations with masked autoencoding and contrastive losses. Now I go to the last part of the talk, which is a new transformer that is actually going to be presented next month at ICML as an oral. And the main idea here is that this is a very fast model that's especially good for video classification and video tasks, and it's very simple. And it also uses this masked autoencoding pre-training. So the main idea here is really, it's a very simple hierarchical transformer that is created actually by removing a bunch of bells and whistles from an existing hierarchical transformer that we also published 1 year ago. And this only works, removing these bells and whistles, only because we pre-trained with ME now. So the model looks like this. So we have the input. Again, we mask out a large fraction, like 70–80%. And then the encoder actually now has multiple stages. So it's not just a vision transformer that has the same spatial resolution and the same number of channels in each transformer block. It actually starts with a high spatial resolution, 56×56, similar as in ConfNets, and a lower channel dimension. And then in the next stage, it doubles the channel dimension here and decreases the resolution by 2x to 28×28 pixels, and then to 14×14 pixels. And this is then similar to a VIT kind of resolution, vision transformer. And then the last resolution would be 7×7. And then we have a decoder, and it's trained very similarly. And then we predict the raw input that is actually masked out here. So this is the way it's pre-trained. And one thing that we found is that's important, or quite important, is to use actually a multi-scale decoder here, because you have multi-scale features at the encoder level, so the decoder can be multi-scale as well. So here you can see the effect on image and video classification when you use a multi-scale decoder. especially for image classification, the gain is not too large. It's like 0.6 on ImageNet classification percent. But for video, the gain is larger. So we see like nearly 2% gain for using multi-scale decoder during pre-training. And this multi-scale decoder basically taking the features of each of the stages here, downsampling them to the common resolution of 14 by 14, and then sending it to this decoder. The downsampling is with one convolutional layer. So how can we make this model work? Actually, we need a few tricks. We want to remove a lot of tricks from these existing hierarchical transformers, and the way we can do that is as follows. So first of all, MAE is not compatible with multi-scale models because MAE masks out complete tokens. So like a token corresponds to 16 by 16 pixels in a VIT. But for these multi-scale models, one token is actually corresponding just to a smaller extent, just 4 by 4 pixels. So if we mask out just 4 by 4 pixels, it would be too easy of a task, because then you just mask out small regions of the input. So what we do is we mask out larger mask units. We mask out 32 by 32 pixels. So we have two different terminology. We have a mask unit and we have the tokens, and they're not the same size. So the first layer produces tokens that corresponds to 4 by 4 pixels, but the mask regions are larger. So as you can see here. The second thing is, if you would apply MAE and know that like MAE is actually deleting parts of the input, and these multi-scale models, they're actually using convolutions. So if you would delete parts of the input, you can no longer do a convolution. Because if you think about, you have a 3 by 3 convolutional kernel, you slide it over, this actually partly deleted input sequence, then this would no longer be possible, right? So you cannot use a convolution. Or you just like can do another trick, just keep these mask tokens, then you can do a convolution, but then it's very computationally inefficient. So you give up about 4 to 10x of training speed up. So therefore, what we do is, one thing you can do the convolution just within the mask units, and then you add some padding. But this is also not desirable, because first, this is complicated and you need to add padding, and also it hurts in performance. So what we actually ended up by doing is we replaced convolutions by max pooling. We did not see a performance drop because we use MAE pre-training. And we set the kernel of the max pooling equal to the stride. And then there is no overlap between these mask units. So then you can actually train this efficiently by just deleting these tokens at the input. And the max pooling will never overlap. So I don't have time to go into detail ablations for how we do remove these bells and whistles. But for, like, if someone is interested, please have a look at the paper. The main experimental finding we have is that this work is about 2x faster than concurrent works like ConfNext version 2, and quite a bit more accurate on ImageNet and other works as well that we compare to. But the biggest speed up we actually get on video understanding. For video, compared to what is the standard out there using a VIT for classification and detection tasks, this model can be about 2 to 3x faster, while also being much more accurate. So this is maybe the main plot where we compare to previous work in terms of speed accuracy trade-off, where ImageNet accuracy is shown on the vertical axis, inference speed faster is better is shown here. One thing that we learned doing this work is that VIT is actually pretty fast. If you have a 800 GPU and if you have a large batch size and so on, the VIT transformer vanilla is actually pretty fast. And then this higher model is faster than a VIT, especially for smaller size models that you see here. And the second thing on video, we actually saw that this model can be much faster, because on video, this multi-scale decomposition seems to be more important, because the input is much higher in terms of in terms of the size. So your input dimensionality is by the number of frames larger. So this model can bring much more speed up if applied to video classification. Okay, so this brings me to the last slide. In this work, or in this talk, sorry, I talked about 4 works. They are all connected with mask autoencoding. First, we looked at video MAE, which learns unsupervised or self-supervised representations from video input. We can use very high masking ratios to make this efficient. Then we looked at mask fit, which studied basically various features that we can also predict for mask autoencoding, not just RGB values. Then we looked at audio learning with just audio MAE, and then masked learning with audio and video information in this joint model. And finally, I presented this HIRA model, which is a new transformer that's also trained with mask autoencoders, which is quite simple and very fast compared to other works out there. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
If you have any questions, please come to the middle and speak to the mic. Thanks.
Very much for the presentation. About regarding the audio, so you go with this features, especially around. So you also tried
The raw waveform.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. We didn't try. The main reason is we don't know how to make the transformer work for this, because basically you have a 1D sequence that is very long, like it's, like depends on the sample rate, but it can be very long. And then it's much easier, the naive version of just using a vision transformer in the MEL spectrogram, which seems to be like the common way in the audio domain. If you use another kind of, like if you use the 1D sequence from the waveform, I think you need to have a multi-scale representation that downsamples this over several stages. So we didn't really look into that, but I think it's a great point, because eventually you want to get rid of that. It's like, yeah, handcrafted input representation. It's, yeah, but it's on the other hand, it's very popular in the community for audio recognition.
Thank you.
Also great talk. I guess I just have a simple question here. Between the 3 properties, like for example, the data, present videos, the model architecture, and also the training objective. So far here, it seems like you're advocating obviously for a very simple training objective here. But moving forward, for tackling video representation learning, what do you think of those 3 is probably the most important to do this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think going forward, like one way to move forward from this work here, we didn't talk about text, and text is very it's very popular right now for computer vision language learning. Of course, you could move forward and use text as another modality for this model, for example, for the masked audio video learning. I think it would be very interesting to go either this route, incorporating text, and then you can do a GPT-like model that works on multiple modalities, or not at all going into the text domain, and because the whole community moves there anyway. So I think what's also interesting is like just to looking at how can we, like when you compare it to the NLP domain, we don't have large models that work as well in computer vision. So scaling up these models is also, I think, very interesting. But I also feel like we tried that a bit, and the MAE training objective is not enough for getting there. We've seen in this work, contrastive learning can provide a good benefit, but I think it's a very interesting research question. What is the right way of getting there? Is it MAE, is it contrastive learning, or is it something else? Yeah.
Thank you for the talk, very interesting. My question is, for all of these different approaches that you described here, you have these different sampling techniques that you looked into, random sampling, or time-based or spatial-based biases. So my question is, did you see or observe in predictions from those other sampling techniques any specific types of biases?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I could, for example, show an example, but I don't think we have time. But basically, if you mask out consecutive temporal chunks for the audio work, it just the model has no idea what to fill in there, right? So it needs always, like, that's why I think this random masking that just like drops a frequency part and then drops a temporal part, it always knows like better what to fill in the missing region, right? So if you really drop consecutive temporal chunks, it doesn't sound good. Like it's producing nonsense there. So maybe that's yeah, one explanation why it doesn't work so well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys, we are running out of time. So could you please take the question later on? Thank you. Yeah, we have to go for the next part. Sorry for that. If you have any further questions, you can talk to Chris.
Thank you.
One?
Test. AGI. Okay.
A lot of them we do. Those 4 ideas are.
You please unmute. Can you please unmute? We cannot hear anything.
Okay, now can people hear me on the Zoom? Hopefully, yes. Anyway, hopefully my slides were self-explanatory, so you didn't need to actually hear me, but I'm now I'll do a little recap for those who are on Zoom and got the silent version of the talk. I'm presenting the Cutler method. That's work was collaborative with Meta and Berkeley and Michigan. And the key idea of Cutler is to take an underlying model such as Dino, which has this raw sort of self-attention signal, and use a classic method from decades ago, unsupervised clustering, normalized cut-based clustering, and use it to find these very nice segments. Okay, that alone would be a pretty cool contribution. But what's the key idea of the Cutler paradigm is to actually use that as training data for a direct, efficient end-to-end segmentation model. So the mask cut method generates supervised training data, which can be used to train essentially a mask predicting detector model to very efficiently find these clusters. Okay, let's see if my great. So mask cut takes this patchified input, the sort of the Dino representations that come out of a VIT that's been trained with the Dino loss, compute a patchwise affinity matrix, and then iteratively find masks using normalized cut. Normalized cut hopefully is the classic method that you've all learned in your computer vision course, pre-deep learning, and it gets very nice segmentation masks. And then what you can do is use this to train directly a mask prediction detection model and very efficiently get very pretty results such as these masks formed here. So this is all completely unsupervised. There were no labels used to create these masks. These are kind of found by the mask cut method and then used to train the Cutler method, which can then be used very efficiently to infer masks on large data sets. So we train Cutler solely on an unlabeled image data, and then we can evaluate it, or they can evaluate it on 11 different data sets, ranging from paintings to videos and traffic images. And each of them, the Cutler model actually significantly beat the state of the art as of the time of this work. So here's some results on paintings, works across a wide number of domains. This is sort of the advantage of using a kind of a pre-deep learning method, something that doesn't actually use labels, but uses notions of grouping and spatial consistency, such as in normalized cut. Here are sketches, the segments look very good. Here are clip arts, segments also are very, very good. Natural images, of course, videos, we'll see more about videos in just a moment. Traffic image, so these were still images extracted from videos. They weren't actually videos. Traffic images, and it works obviously on small objects as well. So the quantitative results here on many different data sets, significant improvement in performance across a wide number of tasks. Compared to the previous state of the art, the discriminative instances are better, can discover more objects and have more precise segmentation masks. And often actually find instances that were missed by human annotators and actually were errors in the ground truth. And this can work as a good pre-trained model. Code is available. And again, this is a talk at the main conference. I encourage you to go see. But wait, there's more. I mentioned video. Now here's the extension to video. Also a collaboration with FAIR and my lab. And I think it's fairly straightforward. You can actually notice a lot of the problems that state-of-the-art methods had in video segmentations relied on the fact, or were due to the fact that such previous methods often relied on optic flow. And I've been working on optic flow since I was a grad student, on and off. And there are lots of advantages of optic flow, but there are lots of disadvantages of optic flow as well. Lots of cases where it's hard to make sure that the underlying assumptions are held. So we wanted to explore a method that certainly didn't have any labels, but also didn't even use optic flow, and just was like a brute force predicts a block of segmented frames coming from a video. And you can see the model, the video Cutler model is based on Cutler. It has all of the benefits of the Cutler model. except Cutler has this key omission of not tracking over time. So we just built a method that could track over time using the same spirit of Cutler. So it takes unlabeled images, it runs dyno features or other features to compute an affinity matrix, and then uses a classic pre-deep learning computer vision technique to cluster or segment those into a set of masks, and then creates a set of really sprite-like, and that not talking about Sprite the soda, I'm talking about Sprite, the ancient computer graphics concept of a bunch of translating objects in a scene, kind of like, you know, Mario Brothers graphics. Creates a bunch of synthetic videos, which are just literally objects moving across a scene. And they're moving with linear, like 2D translational dynamics. Completely unnatural, completely unrealistic. This method never sees a natural video, not once, which is really surprising. And from that, we train a mask deformer. We use that as ground truth, make the labels consistent across the entire block of video. And then the model can actually work on natural videos and output consistent blocks. It's obviously not outputting any class labels here. Each one of these is just a different instance because it's a class agnostic video object predictor. So it's really impressive to me that this model is able to do so well on video, despite never actually having been trained even on unlabeled video. Right? It's only been trained on unlabeled imagery, from which it learned this single frame segmenter model based on a normalized cut pseudo labeling of dyno features, from which a mask predictor was trained. And then with very, very simple, like the weakest assumption you can imagine for generating synthetic videos is able to actually work on real videos. There aren't too many challenge data sets out there for this. On the one that we found, YouTube Viz, the baselines basically didn't function at all. So we reported this as the first successful method. I guess if some people felt these results were too good. We'll take issue with reviewers number blank and blank. But you know, if results are too good, that should be a good sign, not a bad sign. And this can actually be a very strong pre-trained model in a number of settings. So I'll just point you back to these videos and Video Cutler. I believe the archive is out already. And I think in concert with the revolution that we're seeing with models like SAM, and I'm sure the video extensions of SAM that either are out or will be soon, or other people will also make, I think these unsupervised bottom-up models are a real underpinning of how we can learn without any labels in the future. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit. What time do you want me to actually end? How much time do you want me to recover for this, for the schedule? Will you tell me when I'm done? So now we're going to talk about how language, kind of changing gears. That was bottom up. Now we're going to come from the side. We're going to come from language. Not really sort of using CLIP, but really how can language help with problem specifications? How can language help overcome domain shifts, right? We know a lot of the problems we have in vision are we test in one situation and a new situation arises that's different, and we have to overcome that fact. And here we want to use language, in fact, interactive language with the person who owns the system. Like, I own a system, I want to classify birds. There are birds out there in the world. Turns out they're land birds and water birds. And I'm going to ask you to tell me whether the bird in front of my camera is a land bird or a water bird, because I have some conservation challenge. And you know, this would be great if you could give me segmented training data, because you know that's what the task is. But what I actually get in a typical labeled computer vision system are data like this, where I have just zeros and ones, target class is on the right. What's the target class? Well, the model, if you just give it training data like this, how does the model really know if it's, see, the problem is land birds, where do you usually see them? On the land. Water birds, where do you usually see them? In the water. Now, if you're test data matches your training distribution, and indeed, in your test data, all the water birds are going to be in the water, this is great. Go ahead and do supervised learning. But in the real world, we may now suddenly have climate change changing our environments, or I might be trying to classify these things in my zoo or my backyard. And I know that actually whether it's rained or not isn't actually relevant to whether this is bird type 0 or bird type 1. So how do I do that? I have to go out and collect or manufacture training data to balance this distribution. We don't think you should. We think you should actually do what a human would do, which is if I was training a person to do this task, I would just tell the system, hey, this is a bird task. Don't pay no attention to the background. Or you can expect that the training data has a land-water bias, or all birds can appear on land and water. So what would a human do with this? Well, a human would say, oh, I actually know what birds are. I know that birds exist. And I should probably pay attention to the bird and maybe ignore the background. So that was this first idea. And in fact, and a large-scale vision and language model can enable that, right? Because a large-scale vision and language model, like CLIP, is very good at saying, I know where the birds are. And conversely, I also know where land is, or which is land and which is water. But there's a trade-off in these large-scale vision and language models. The large-scale models are generally robust to contextual bias, but they fail to do well at fine-grained categories. So if you just want to recognize bird versus cat, pretty good. But if you really want to recognize a specific type of water bird and contrast that with a specific type of land bird, maybe not. So what we did in this first project that we're going to talk about, this sort of 3 micro projects in the language advice section here, is the simple idea that we call GALS, guiding visual attention with language, which is just tell the model what you care about, enforce the model, pay attention to what you care about, and watch your generalization performance improve. And we do that using an attention loss and telling the model, literally pay attention to what the person told you to pay attention to. So this is using kind of GradCam, which is often thought of as an explainable AI method. I'm not that interested in explainable AI for the sake of making people feel good about a model, but I am excited about what we call advice or advisable models, which are when you use these mechanisms to actually make the model perform better. And that's what we showed in this this GALS paper. I think that was at the citation is about to come. I forget which conference it was at. And if you train a model with GALS, instead of attending to the wrong thing that a vanilla CNN would attend to, like the background, it'll actually pay attention to the thing that you care about and do the right thing. And it can even reduce implicit bias in a variety of scenarios, like if you're trying to classify meat versus non-meat, you should probably look at what's on the plate, not what's being served with the meat. I mean, probably, I don't know. And if you're trying to classify the gender of a person, you should probably pay attention to the features of the person and not like what job they have or what tools they're carrying, things like that. So that's GALS. It gets you some of the way there, but let's keep going. Let's keep going with language, advisable language systems to improve robustness. So we'd like to not only tell the model what to look at, we'd like to give the model additional exposure to the fact that this concept might appear in different places. And we're going to do that both textually in the LADS work and then visually using diffusion models in the last little step here. And I apologize in the interest of time. By the way, when did you want me to finish? 15? Okay. So that's 2/3 of the original time, which is good. I can compress. This is going to be using augmentation in semantic space, and then next we'll augment in pixel space using a different mechanism. So CNNs are great for some things, but they're not so great when the domain shift happens. CLIP, zero shot is great, except it's not as accurate overall. What if we use our language to tell the model to hallucinate the training data in a new domain? That's indeed what we've done in this LADS paper. And the LADS paper takes imagery, maps it into the clip space, adds language, accepts additional language specifications for different domains, and then imagines what the training image would look like in that new domain, and uses that as augmentation for a classifier. So we do this using a set of losses that I won't try and explain in detail right here, but there's essentially a class consistency loss and a domain adaptation loss. You've seen things like that before in our work and others, but here it's being done in the clip space, and the overall performance is pretty good. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this. This cool qualitative result where you look at the nearest neighbor embedding as you map from one domain to the next, and that semantic shift does correspond to a visual shift. The most recent version of this idea that we're exploring is somewhat complementary, but to use diffusion models to generate additional training data to augment your source imagery. You've got an image of a bird near water, you might want to have it also on land or something like that. And so we actually use diffusion models. If you take a diffusion model and use it to generate captions of what the environment is, use an LLM to summarize what environment your actual data describes, you can use that to condition a diffusion model to augment your source imagery with additional imagery that's quite realistic given the other imagery in your training set. So if you're looking at a camera trap, you might have some views which are in a field of dirt and shrubs. You have another one which is near a lake and a field, and so on and so forth. You use those to augment your data using a diffusion model and add those to your training set. It turns out that's can be quite accurate, and much more accurate than other approaches for augmentation, such as you can see here. You can see that a lot of so people have proposed the idea of using diffusion models for augmentation, but they weren't conditioned on both language and the previous and the source image. So here, maybe we're actually kind of doing a little bit of a trust region or some sort of constrained augmentation. We're saying, don't augment too far. Don't just make up images of a certain category just on the text alone. It's got to look like the source imagery and have the textual description that you wanted. And if you do that, you certainly get improvement over baseline augmentations. But really interestingly, from the iWildCam data, the ALIA method is actually more efficient than, or more effective than adding an equal amount of real data to the test set, to the training set, excuse me. So that's very cool. So this is the ideas from this language. Use language to advise your models. Tell the model what to look at, what to be robust to, and you can either use feature augmentation or pixel augmentation to get there. So these last two themes, I'm going to have to just give you the very high level. I think the first two things we talked about of unsupervised segmentation models, a lot of work there, and I've just summarized a series of papers on language-driven visual robustness. Also want to point out all my co-authors. Now we're going to get to relatively new stuff and stuff that actually dovetails exactly with the previous talk. And I'd first do the modular question answering. It's new, but it's also old. This is collaboration with several colleagues, including colleagues from Google, from Cordelia's group. We've been interested in visual question answering or really hard tasks for quite a while, you know, and you can shove your favorite convent or transformer at a model and see if it can get the right answer. But a lot of really hard questions are not, even humans sometimes don't just get them as reflex, right? There's a line of thinking that says, rather that one was, yeah, that one is reflex. Is there a horse in the scene? I don't need to think too much. I can just probably flash a convnet at it. It'll say horse exists. What about, is there a carriage to the right of the horse? Or how many windows are present above text in the image? And these are all questions that you can answer. We can define them, probably have pretty high iterator agreement, but I don't want to train a convnet or even a VIT to do this. I want to train something that can reason about what's going on in the image. And this is kind of the notion of modular computer vision, modular question answering, modular neural networks, or planning or visual routines. These all goes by the same line. So this is the kind of thing that we like to be able to do. I'm actually going to also switch and share some slides from Carl Vondrek. His group came up with a very similar idea, so I'm going to interleave the results. But here's the demo that he shows. What are these boys eating? If you just run it through blip2, you get muffin. Okay, that's great. Where are the muffins? On the table. How many muffins are there? 2. Okay, unfortunately, you know. So there's a limitation of the brute force approach, where you just smash an image in a query into a neural network. And we've all been focusing on these things in many different ways. And there's another approach, actually, Jacob Andreas, Dan Klein, and I proposed in the Neural Modular Networks paper back in 2015, which is to actually do a kind of first have one module that comes up with a plan. Like if I asked you how many windows are above text, well, you should probably instantiate something that finds text. Then you should instantiate something that finds windows. And then you should instantiate a spatial relation thing between those, and then run that network. And so that's what we did in neural modular networks. We actually imagined you would create a special network that had all those elements that could be jointly trained. And what, you know, fast forward to 2023, what's the new thing that's changing our world? It's these LLMs. And these LLMs know how to code. And it turns out that LLMs that know how to code actually already can solve a lot of those visual skills that we struggled back in 2000, whenever it was 15, to train models to come up with quote unquote program specifications. And Carl's group also has come up with the same idea that my group has also explored very recently. So this is again his slide. He started with neural modular networks. This is our work here. And of course, Carl's work is Viper GPT, which is super cool. These last two things came out contemporaneously, independent of each other. But the idea is very cool. It's ask the LLM to give you a program specification to solve the computer vision task. So is the carriage to the right of the horse? I mean, you pick your favorite LLM, it can probably figure out, and these are now our slides. Actually, our paper is being reported at ACL this summer. I think this is from ChatGPT. It knows that there's a way to just take that textual sentence and really compute a semantic parse, if you will, or just directly output Python. Kind of surprised me when I first saw this, and I think there's still a lot of open questions in this body of work that will be hopefully answered in many future publications. But this is cool, right? Already we have, not only do we have visual common sense in CLIP, but we have visual skill common sense in these LLMs. And you get the theory here, which is you can then instantiate a series of primitives like localizing objects, and you can then run the model, actually figure out the answer to these things and say the answer is no. So here's a, are there 4 pandas in the set of images? This is, I guess, a set pictures, and the baseline method says no. But this code-based method that first knows that it should actually run something that counts pandas does better. The model outperforms a lot of baselines and is really cool. And I definitely want to encourage you to not only look at our work that's being reported at ACL, but also look at Carl's work that got out on GitHub sooner and is very, very cool. We actually, I think we picked the path of submitting our paper for review at a conference in an NLP journal or an NLP conference, and they have a publication, what do you call it, a bar or block, quiet period. And Carl's group didn't. That was the right decision because I think being out there earlier on GitHub was more fun. But then our paper was accepted and we were able to talk about it. And both Carl's work is excellent and so is ours. I think that's a good lesson as an aside. I encourage everyone to vote at the PAMI meeting against the social media embargo periods. It just creates too many complications. The NLP community has an even worse one than the vision community. But it would be nice to let authors talk about their work honestly and fairly, in my humble opinion. Okay, so I've got 1.5 minutes left. And this will be easy because you all know what MAE is, because we just saw the awesome talk before mine. Turns out you can just take MAE, you can run it on figures from a computer vision papers, and that alone can solve computer vision to a first approximation, for a very, very crude first order statement there. We know how to prompt GPT. We want to do vision prompting. This is what we call vision prompting. It's sort of like what we used to call vision analogies. How do we do this? Well, if we believe in all this LLM magic, it's just MAE. And I'm just gonna give you A is to B as B is, A is to B as A prime is to what? And then ask MAE to inpaint the damn thing. Because that's how BERT worked. That's how these GPT models work. And this is work that we originally showed last year, reported at NeurIPS 2022. Image inpainting alone gives you a lot of juice. It's really kind of cool and scary how much you can get out of it. As I told you, well, why don't you train it on computer vision figures? So we scraped a bunch of figures from archive and ran MAE on it, randomly cropping figures. That's all we did, maybe with a little bit of additional just unsupervised model. It's not exactly MAE, it's like the BQ-GAN version of MAE. I think that makes a small difference, but it's not a big issue. And so you basically reconstruct the model, and it can give you answers like that, where you only show it those first 3 tiles and it inpaints that. And there's nothing else. I didn't do language guidance. I didn't do anything else yet. That's just from pixels alone, it can figure out that there's some sort of transformation going on in a repetitive pattern. If all you did was look at computer vision figures your whole life, you would already know what you're supposed to do here, even if you're just an MAE or a BQ-GAN MAE. Works for segmentation, works for colorization, works for inpainting, of course, works for edge detection. It worked for some sort of weird things that we thought probably weren't in any figure, in any paper, like shape change, color change, and resizing. It could do 2 things at once, sort of well, but there were places where it would start to fail. And you can read the NeurIPS paper for a discussion of those. And as at the end of the NeurIPS paper, we said, how could you improve it? Well, obviously scaling, everyone wants to scale. More natural image data, it does help when you add some ImageNet data. But more modalities. Why don't we actually read the paper and not just look at the pixels? And that's what we've done and recently submitted to a recent conference. And this should be on archive in the coming weeks or sometime over the summer. Because the pixel only inpainting worked, but not always. And so what's actually quite interesting and impressive is a multimodal version of this. So not only do we look at the figures, we actually read the caption. And the caption tells you what the model's supposed to do. Even zero shot without any other pixels, if you just say left input image, right black and white foreground. I mean, this is sort of like what you might have seen from Flamingo or models like this, but the text prompt actually gets you part of the way there. If you give it text and an image prompt, your results start to improve. And this generalizes to a reasonably wide set of vision tasks, such as the ones that we'd explored before. So I'm out of time, but I think you get the idea. Maybe this is a good place to end my talk, connecting with the previous talk of this, the power of unsupervised representation learning. There are lots of future possibilities, both with raw pixel level, as we're seeing here, but also using more cognitive or planning-based models, such as the modular VQA. And so with that, I'm going to sort of jump to the end and back out of the 4 cool things I told you about: visual prompting using MAE, modular VQA using code generation, talking to your model to tell it what you want. Sort of inverse explainability is advisability, and very, very strong models for unsupervised segmentation that come out of the Cutler family of algorithms. And I just want to thank all my colleagues and students who are mentioned on this slide and all the papers that we have written together. With that, I will end and take a question or two. Thank you.
If you have any question, please come to the middle and speak to the mic. This time we have around 9 minutes for the Q&A.
Yes, I'm not going to try to make this a fight, but so your video cover, if you're going to stay with the realm of not using optical flow, what are you going to do about camouflage, like the really focused data centers, like that?
I think that's the case where you do want to use optic flow. And I didn't say I never want to use optic flow. I think people overused optic flow to begin with. But certainly if you want to do random dot motion or camouflage, it's important. And I think maybe, yeah, but there are plenty of cases where you don't need to use, like there probably are more cases in the world where I have uniformly colored objects moving around than I have camouflage color objects moving around. And so, assuming that optic flow is going to be there is, I think, the problem. And I do feel like yeah, we shouldn't be too negative on optic flow. What we should be, because I think the people who've really done research on optic flow for many years fully understand all these issues. But there's some other people who applied optic flow in segmentation models who didn't fully understand optic flow. And it's those people, I think, probably should have a balance in their use of the tool.
But this, well, these two guys right here with the paper tomorrow using unsupervised video object segmentation, no optical flow, and full CVPR on camouflage data sets.
That sounds really cool. I'm looking forward to it. What time is the paper?
Mark.
Excellent. Should be fun.
Can I just ask a question about number 3? Just sort of, so I wanted to ask a question on number 3, these visual routines. So it seems you're bottlenecking this reasoning process with these API calls, getting the LLM to generate these API calls and discrete instances of the image. Do you think that's the best that we can do now because of the capability of current vision models, or do you think there's a future in which we can do this all end to end the same way that language models do? So language models can do this sort of reasoning and compositionality just by unsupervised learning at web scale. Do you think we'll get to that kind of
Probably. And I think the definition of end to end is probably the subtle point. So I would say, can you define end to end to me? Because there's, I would certainly say that this paradigm should be extended to then actually improve the reasoning from end-to-end learning. Now, with the current engineering architectures, that would be prohibitively impossible using the way CodeVQA or RipeForGPT are architected. But looking at it from a 5 or 10 year perspective, I think these things are going to all push back into each other, and we will learn better visual routine program structures by performing on visual routine program structures. I'm not sure whether CodePilot or GPT 3.5, which knows a lot about how to code, might not be optimal yet for learning how to code visual routines. And actually, if you created an environment where it had to spend years in a simulator generating code for various visual routines, it probably would get better itself at that task. Probably there's something incomplete about what I just said, but so take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, I think in general, I don't want everything to be fine-grained end to end, but I do think everything should be loosely end to end.
Thanks, this talk. And in the domain, when mentioning dealing with dimension issue, you mentioned that augment data by new models. And the pre-S, there was like the bird with water, bird with land. But it seems that land and water are some handcrafted things. But in real world, the bird can be with any others. And I wonder, how do you know how many things that we have to pre-add?
First part, how many, where might birds exist?
I mean, how do we know we have to pre-add? How we have to augment data like bird with water, bird with land? Why not bird with in the sky or grass or something else?
Yeah, I couldn't quite hear clearly. Maybe it's the speaker. I mean, are you saying how do you know what domain shift to talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the problem specification that I think is common for many practitioners in the world. You're working for a car company, you're building a model to detect whether there are defects, and the model suddenly fires off when there's an extra paperclip in the corner of the table that's not related to the part because the paperclip's never been seen before. Well, you say ignore the paperclip, right? I think it's the ability, and I mean, that's the spirit of these unsupervised models. They can suddenly segment entire regions of the image using Cutler or using SAM just by a single click. And so I can refer to any pixel in there and that label will get propagated throughout the whole thing. And the same is true with language now. It's like, well, ignore the extra laptop on the table. It's not important. That's what we want to be able to convey to a machine vision system.
I wonder if this will make some images, not videos. So I wonder how the performance of phone can be used for textual inclusion.
Well, I think we had a good question earlier that said it probably doesn't work well on camouflage. Who knows? That's probably an area where the performance won't be as strong as on the others. But it does work on natural occlusions because the underlying static image segmenter is actually good enough to track the occlusion over time. So it's not using optic flow from frame to frame to propagate the occlusion boundary, but just the single image segmenter gets the occlusions right. And essentially all that's needed for video processing is just to have label consistency. I think there's some more additional, I think I'm shocked that this training data regime actually worked. And so I would not want to claim that it's optimal. And I'm sure there are some interesting cases of complicated occlusion where this training data won't suffice.
Thanks for the great talk. I have a question regarding the third part modular visual keys. So the computer vision community was always very, let's say, has had a lot of progress when we had controlled benchmarks like ImageNet. So for this kind of work, I think it's really impressive, like the demos that we can see. But I wonder what you think are the right benchmarks for this kind of work. So like, how can we measure progress?
I need Alyosha here to argue about data sets and benchmarks, but I mean, of course, that's true. I think almost all the good things in the field and only some of the bad things in the field are from data sets and challenges. But it's always a trade-off, a plus and a minus. Well, so anyway, these performance improvements that the modular VQA algorithm from my lab or Viper GPT from Carl's lab are demonstrating, those are on existing challenges. I mean, I always find when I look at the examples from the challenge that they don't seem like an interesting problem to me, but they still are challenges in terms of what the criteria that you articulated. So I think we are making progress and demonstrating that, the complicated counting or geometric reasoning.
So it's mainly VQA?
Yeah. I think our paper, something happened. Okay, screen sharing. Anyway, I won't bother. Our paper, I think, is only about VQA. I think Carl's paper shows results beyond VQA. Great. All right, let's wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone. Okay, can people on Zoom confirm they can hear this? Okay, sure, again your screen. Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyung from this one. Okay, great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyung from Visual Geometry Group, University of Oxford, and I'll give you a brief talk about our work for GeoChart unsupervised transfer instance segmentation. done with Simon Albany and Wei Xie. Here's the layout of this presentation. I will start with the motivations and task definitions of our work. Next, I'll introduce the proposed method and share some experimental results, as well as discuss the limitations of our approach. And I'll close the talk with a brief mention of related work and a conclusion. While I'm pretty sure that most people here already know what instance segmentation is, given the theme of this workshop, let me quickly go over it and give it an input image, for example, like the image on the left side. Instance segmentation aims to group pixels that constitute a certain object with its name as shown on the right side. Importantly, instance segmentation is a more challenging task compared to semantic segmentation, shown in the middle, as instance segmentation additionally requires to differentiate multiple instances of the same category if they are present in the same image. And in this specific case, there are two cats and a dog in the input image. An ideal instance segmentation has to group pixels for each cat into different segments. And this task of instance segmentation is used for a large array of real-world cases. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I can take it if you want.
Okay. Sorry. Right.
Yeah, the mouse is not working.
Thank you for pointing that out. Should I
Continue.
continue? Okay. So this task of instance segmentation is used for a large array of real-world cases like autonomous driving, making it one of the most practical vision perception tasks. Okay, now that we briefly covered what instance segmentation is, I'd like to remind you the title of our work, Zero-shot unsupervised transfer instance segmentation. That's a long title and honestly can be a little bit confusing. But basically, it means the instance segmentation task with two special restrictions on training. First, it has to be an unsupervised approach in a sense that it does not train a segmenter with manual labels. This is important as labels, especially pixel level segmentation masks, are expensive, thus hard to scale. For example, the authors of this case data set reported that it took 90 minutes to manually annotate a quality image. Second, during training, the model is not able to see images from a target domain. Here by target domain, we refer to a specific domain in which one is going to test the trained segmenter. In other words, the model should not be trained on a training split of certain benchmark, which is a common procedure before evaluating a model on a specific test data set. This restriction is considered in our work as, in some cases, merely obtaining images can be very difficult due to legal or ethical reasons, such as medical data, let alone their annotations. So ideal segmenters should be able to segment instances in an image from a new domain for which it hasn't been trained during training time, which is called zero-shot transfer. Putting them all together, zero-shot unsupervised transfer instance segmentation that we consider in our work aims to segment objects present in an image and predict their semantic categories in both unsupervised and zero-shot transfer manner. So the overall scheme of such an approach to this task might be something like this. During training time, a segmenter is trained with an index image data set, which contains some general images and with some loss for instance segmentation without relying on manual supervision. You have to find it. Then at test time, the model is evaluated whether it generalizes well to images from new data distribution in terms of instance segmentation. In our work, to instantiate such a scheme, we choose a pseudo-label training and train a segmenter on generated pseudo-masks following our previous work named mask. For this, we firstly construct a large index image dataset containing object-centric images such as ImageNet and past datasets, and curate images for a specific set of categories through an image retrieval process with click. For example, in this slide, there are two concepts: dog and cat, and we can build two image archives which contain mostly dog and cat images respectively. Next, we apply an unsupervised segmentation model with to each of the images to obtain pseudo masks for the images. As we already know which image belongs to which category archive, we can easily assign semantic label to each pseudo mask of an image. Okay, I got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to hurry a little bit. In addition, we assume that there is a single object within an image and assign different instance IDs to different pseudo masks within an archive, such that we can train a segmenter which is able to differentiate instances of the same category. Furthermore, to mimic complex instance-centric images, which is a common case for instance segmentation, we simply apply copy-paste augmentation to randomly selected images from the archives and their pseudo mask during training time. Doubly, this pseudo label generation pipeline has two advantages. First, it does not use any models trained with manual labels. Second, as long as you have a large enough set of images, you can readily scale all the way up you want. And adding a new category to segment is as easy as feeding another text prompt to click. Now let's move on to the architecture that we use in our work. First, given an input image, we predict mask proposals through a clip image encoder and a randomly initialized transformer decoder. The transformer decoder is then trained with a mask loss, which is computed based on pseudo mask that I mentioned in the earlier slide. One important observation we made here is that we should stop gradient coming from the decoder to the clean image encoder to keep semantic information in the encoder intact, which I will show you in the latest slide if I have time. And please note that at this stage, the mask proposals are cluster agnostic. And to be able to decide a category for each mask proposal, we consider training a semantic segmentation branch, which is shown at the bottom left corner. For this branch, we first project dense image features into the joint image text space and compute the dot product between the dense features and the text features of a set of categories that we are interested in segmenting. And the image encoder is trained via the standard cross entropy loss with the text encoder process. Once the training is done for the mask proposals and semantic segmentation branches, we can now decide a category for each mask by finding the most dominant semantic category within a highlighted region of a mask proposal. After doing these two all mask proposals, we can filter out some redundant mask proposals which overlap each other with a low confidence score for each prediction. Totally, there are two advantages of this architecture. First, due to the use of a pre-trained text encoder, the classifier, you can segment unseen categories by simply extracting textual features for them once the training is done. In other words, it does not require a fixed set of categories for training and inference times. Second, with a single training, it can be used to operate both semantic segmentation and instance segmentation masks. Now, to evaluate our model, we compare duties, which stands for zero-shot unsupervised transfer instance segmentation, to previous unsupervised instance segmentation methods on COCO 20K mask AP and unsupervised semantic segmentation method on COCO, COCA, and ImageNet as benchmarks in terms of IU. Plus, we also evaluate our model on COCO 20K and COV datasets when it is tasked with segmenting categories that it wasn't trained for during the training time. First, unsupervised instance segmentation. As there hasn't been a method which tackles zero-shot unsupervised instance segmentation, class-aware instance segmentation, we simply compare our method to unsupervised instance class-aware instance segmentation methods. When compared to the state-of-the-art unsupervised method, which is mask-based TIL, this shows a notable performance gain by 3.3 mask IP PT as shown on the right side. And then we compare to unsupervised semantic segmentation methods, and basically it means it performs very well. One thing that I would like to highlight is that on the right side, we show the performance of duties on ImageNet as benchmark, which has 919 object categories, and it shows reasonably well performance even with that many categories as 37.4 in INU. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the advantages GTS has is that once trained, it can be used to segment on sync categories at inference time due to the use of a pre-trained text encoder as a classifier. Quantify this ability of GTS, we evaluate GTS, which is trained with 80 object categories in COCO on a fine-grained web category dataset, CVPR, which is composed of images 200 bird species such as coral, cormorant, Caspian tern, and red-headed pecker. Compared to cases, the first case we make segment an object in an image given a concept bird. And in the second case, we make a segment an object given a specific bird species appearing in the image. If GTS in the latter case can perform as good as the former case, we can perhaps say it is aware of those fine-grained bird species, even though it has never seen them during training. And indeed, that's what we observe as shown on the right side, showing negligible differences in performance between the two cases. However, one might ask whether it actually segments objects based on a given concept, and probably just segments and salient object within an image regardless of the given concept. So to partially answer the question, we trained GTS with 65 categories out of 80 COCO categories and compare its segmentation performance with the state-of-the-art model on the rest of 15 categories. And again, this shows better performance than the previous method. Yeah, I have like several evaluation studies to present, but as we are running out of time, so we'll skip that. And if you have questions about like some details, you can go over to our poster session in our poster session in the poster session. Okay, and yeah, like the previous speakers told, there are like very similar work to ours, which is Cutler, and I also want to recommend you guys to go to the poster, the conference poster session time. Okay, so yeah, as a conclusion, we introduced a new challenge task of zero challenge for by transparency and segmentation, and trained a flexible TensorFlow-based segmenter, which showed decent performance when trained with pseudo labels. Yeah, that's it from me, and thank you very much for your time and attention. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for the great talk. Unfortunately, we don't have time for Q&A for this Nice work.
Thank you.
Have our poster session right now. We'll come back at 3:55. It's 10 minutes later than the one on that page. 10:55. See you later.
Oh, right. Nervous.
Hello. Hello.
We have a pre-recorded video if he doesn't come.
Hey, Graham, if you can hear us, can you share your screen?
Sure, I will get it set up now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm just going to test my audio with you as well. How does that sound?
It's working well. Can you hear me? Can you tell me which one it is?
But I think the speaker is good. We don't want to change the speaker. Do you want to?
No, it's a microphone. Can you hear me?
Me, Graham? I can hear you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So we see well your screen and we can hear you clear.
Oh, okay, great.
So we'll start in how much?
1 minute.
1 minute.
So yeah, who's our?
Okay. He will introduce you and then you can start your talk.
Oh, okay. And I'll start my video too, so you can see me as well. I don't know. Do you see my slides and my video, or are you just showing my slides?
We can only see your slides, but I can try to put your video there as well.
Sure. Yeah, if you can get it going, that's cool.
Now you're there.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody.
It's better actually, yeah.
I guess it simulates the in-person experience a little bit more if you have my video.
Yeah.
Less like a recorded talk.
So after introducing him, mute there. Okay. Which one? Like you have to click there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Awesome. Just click. I left the sounds on.
Let's wait for 1 more minute. Oh, sorry, it's already 55. Then let's get started. Our next speaker is Dr. Farhan Khader. He's a Canada Research Chair and Professor at University of the Guelph. He directs the University of Guelph Center for Advancing Responsible and Ethical AI. He's a research director of the Vector Institute for AI and also a academic editor of Paradise AI. And I welcome Dr. Grant Taylor. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. I had recorded my talk in case of technical difficulties, but it's nice to give it live and in person. And I do wish I was out with you today, especially when I saw that there was a social with board games to hang out with Isam and others. So I hope you all have a wonderful time. So I'm going to be talking about the topic of machine learning for biodiversity. And I think most of you have seen biodiversity in the news. You've experienced it firsthand when you've taken a hike and been outside in the outdoors. Out in Vancouver is certainly a lovely place to go for a walk and enjoy biodiversity. It's really the variety and variability of life on Earth. And scientists who work in the community consider it to be a measure of variation at the genetic, species, and ecosystem level. And to us humans, it's much more than that. So I have a list of different impacts that biodiversity has. And I won't read through them all, but you can just see how much a role it plays. It affects our life and the life of the planet in many ways. But despite its importance, Earth's biodiversity has decreased significantly over the last few decades. And in fact, between 1970 and 2016, the population of vertebrate species fell 68% on average worldwide. So what's causing this global decline? Well, this graphic from WWF shows some of the biggest culprits. Of course, there's climate change. Pollution is also a major driver. Invasive species and disease, species overexploitation, and also changes in land and sea use. We're grappling with this in Ontario right now, talking about housing development as well, unsustainable agricultural practices. But there's places on Earth that are both biologically rich and deeply threatened. And these areas have large numbers of endemic species. Those endemic species are species that are found nowhere else. Many of these are heavily threatened by habitat loss and other human activities. So in this picture by Conservation International, it shows these 36 regions where success in conserving species can have an enormous impact in supporting global biodiversity. And these intact habitats represent just 2.5% of the Earth's land surface, but they support more than half of the world's plant species as endemics and nearly 43% of bird, mammal, reptile, and amphibian species as endemics. So biodiversity researchers really do focus on these hotspots, and you find a lot of them traveling to those regions to collect data for monitoring biodiversity loss. So in 2017, scientists reported a decline of more than 75% in insect biomass across 63 nature areas in Germany between 1989 and 2016. And this is a very heavily cited paper. And so beyond this being a popular work to highlight the biodiversity problem, it's an interesting for a few reasons relevant to my talk. So one, that they're studying insects in this paper, and that's where a lot of our work has been. They measure decline via insect biomass specifically. And so we've been doing some work that relates imagery to the insect individuals and then further on to estimate biomass from images. They leverage citizen scientists who are playing a huge role in annotating data sets for computer vision, and they use malaise traps. And so malaise traps are these tents that trap flying insects, and those are a source of data, particularly the imagery that we use in some of our experiments. So for machine learning and computer vision folks, often the first question in any new subject like biodiversity is what is the data? And so I'm part of a collaboration led by the University of Iisalmela, the University of Helsinki, and Duke University, and this is called LifePlan. LifePlan aims to build a planetary inventory of life and has enrolled 100 teams worldwide to collect different types of biodiversity data. So this is their poster. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I could give a complete talk on everything that's happening within LifePlan. But what I wanted to point out is that the data is highly multimodal. So you have data sources like these camera traps which capture images of animals at day and night, and these audio moths, which are recording bird and bat frequencies. The malaise traps I mentioned before, they will passively trap flying insects, yielding DNA and imagery. These cyclone samplers can basically suck DNA out of the air, and they're used to collect fungal spores, and those fungal spores which are providing the DNA. And then finally, soil samples are also part of this project. The soil samples are sequenced for DNA of fungi that are living in the soil. And so apart from the multimodal nature of the data that's been being collected by these more than 100 groups around the world, the data is also captured at multiple spatial and temporal scales. And so you'll see that in some areas, like where the project is led in Northern Europe, there's very dense sampling. And also in areas, these biodiversity hotspots like Madagascar, they also have very dense sampling. But then you have these other sites all throughout the world. There's one in Guelph, there's other ones in North America too, where at any one of these sites, they're actually collecting all of the different modalities. It basically goes out as a kit, and education is provided to the groups that are doing the data collection. The other major project I'm involved with is called Bioscan, and it's actually led out of my home university, the University of Guelph. And Bioscan is a global interdisciplinary effort to build a biodiversity observation system. So the project is costing around $180 million between 2019 and 2018, involving more than 1,000 researchers in more than 30 countries. And Bioscan actually focuses on what are called DNA barcodes. So you use DNA sequencers to focus on a single gene on which to base clusters. And then these clusters are kind of like algorithmically defined species. They closely match what entomologists would call species based on physical inspection. And so I'll give you just a quick overview of the DNA barcoding process and how we yield data from it. So you have first a specimen that comes in. It is a physical specimen, so it's been caught and it's dead. You would take a piece of it, like a piece of wing or leg off of it, and then send that for DNA sequencing. That's step 2. That's currently in the lab using systems like PacBio or Illumina. But this is actually moving out to the field now with technologies like nanopore. I was at a meeting last week where they were detailing basically the rapid acceleration of nanopore sequences that are going to be able to bring these sort of portable units all over to different places in the world. And then in step 3 is really the bioinformatics pipeline that cleans up the sequences and yields these consistent length short snippets called these barcodes. And then once you have the barcodes, they can be clustered through an algorithm yielding what are called barcode index numbers or bins. And those are added to the barcode of life database, also known as BOLD, along with a taxonomic information if that's available. So just to give you an idea, in BOLD right now, there's close to 12 million barcode sequences, and 5 million of those have a species level identification. So that's the most granular type of annotation, but many more are annotated to higher levels like family or genus or order. It just depends on what experts are available for that particular taxa and what gets added to the database. So in terms of the annotation, it's sparse, it's hierarchical in nature. And you have this unique notion of sort of species defined by Linnaean taxonomy and species that can be defined by an algorithmic clustering procedure. Okay, so apart from the focus on DNA in these projects, researchers at this conference, CVPR, might be interested that the Center for Biodiversity Genomics that's leading this project is also collecting imagery at an impressive rate. So the individuals can be imaged like this using a Keonce microscope. So these are insects that are in a well. They can do 96 of these at the same time using a robotics procedure. And they're basically collecting this year they're added 3 million records to the database, and the plan is by 2028 to be getting to 100 million records. And in addition to those individual images, it's quicker and also common to collect what are known as bulk images. And these have between 100 and 1,000 bugs in a single image. And in some of these cases, as I'll mention towards the end of the talk, you can actually have both. You can have bugs that are collected in bulk, but then the same bug might be taken out and individually imaged. So you have a domain shift problem, but you have basically a big database that have high resolution samples that could be matched to these individuals in the bulk images. So one message I do want to convey to AI and machine learning folks is that there's a lot more here than just throwing like a CNN or a vision transformer at the problem. There's a lot of really interesting machine learning problems here in biodiversity analysis. And many of these problems I've actually learned about, like these machine learning tasks specifically, while working in this field. So there's a lot of open world problems. This is the idea of recognizing novel classes. So we're still doing species discovery. Many of you have probably heard that the majority of the world's biodiversity is still uncatalogued. So you want to be able to recognize existing species in a reference database, but also discover new species as they are collected and found. Zero-shot learning, which I'll mention at the end. We might be familiar in the vision field using text data as side information for zero-shot. And this has been mentioned at the workshop already. But we can also use these DNA barcodes as side information, rich indicators of what it means to be a species. Set value classification. I'll spend most of my time today talking about set value classification, the idea of having a classifier not produce just a single label for an input, but a variable number of labels for each input. I've mentioned the notion of the hierarchy of labels. So it's a taxonomic classification problem. And then definitely a big topic, even at the workshop today, is the notion of repurposing large scale models, the use of self-supervised learning and transfer learning at scale, people are calling foundation models. And there's a real opportunity to build foundation models for biodiversity, including those that are multimodal in nature. So let me talk about a few of the issues with biodiversity data, and some of these have already been explored in the workshop today. So the biodiversity data tends to have a long-tailed label distribution. So I'm showing a plot from iNaturalist 2018, which is a data set some of you might be familiar with already. And you can see that in the training set, there's a few classes which have a large, like a decent 1,000 or more number of images in those classes, but that quickly falls off. And so there's a large amount of species that are represented only between 10 and say 50 images. And then some of them even have less than 10 images in the data set. But here in iNaturalist, you're expected to do well on all of the species. The validation set is uniform in its distribution. And the nature of the data tends to contribute to different types of uncertainty. So there's aleatoric and epistemic uncertainty. I'll elaborate on that in a moment. And also, the nature of the data exacerbates these problems of calibration using deep neural nets, including vision architectures. And so just to dig into the uncertainty a bit more, there's epistemic uncertainty, which we often refer to as things you don't know, and we call it reducible because if we collect more data, we're often able to improve on this type of and reduce this type of uncertainty. Sometimes we just call this the uncertainty, and the other type of uncertainty, the risk. The other type of uncertainty, which we call the risk, is also known as aleatoric uncertainty. And this has to do with things that are stochastic in the world. So aleatoric uncertainty arises from visually very similar specimens. And then the epistemic uncertainty, the first one, arises from very little training data in many of the classes. So both of these uncertainty are present, but some of this aleatoric uncertainty, we call it irreducible because it just won't go away. Trained experts have difficulty identifying at the species level particular plant species or insect species. A lot of the entomologists who have been working with insects have been working in very, very specific taxa from very early years of their life. And it's a very difficult problem. And also a lot of them are retiring or dying, and we're not training them at the rate we once were. So it really, there is an opportunity here for AI and ML. Now, to get a bit more formal about calibration, I mentioned that calibration of models is challenging here. And this is just a picture of a 3-layer neural network. And we're used to, in classification, having like a softmax output and interpreting the probabilities, the outputs of the softmax as probabilities. And we're often used to just using as a proxy for probability of the class, the maximum, the value associated with the maximum element of the softmax. But that's not necessarily a calibrated probability. It's a convenient one or a heuristic one. What we mean when we say that the classifier is calibrated is basically saying that the probability that we would have a correct prediction given the probability output by the classifier would be that probability. So as a specific example, given 100 predictions from the model, each that had a confidence or probability of 0.8, we would expect that 80 of these should be correctly classified. And if that is true, we call it a calibrated classifier. But it's well known that convolutional neural nets in particular are not well calibrated. So there's this paper from 2017, it's a very influential paper now, that compared what they called modern neural nets, which were ResNets at the time, to sort of old school LeNet ConvNets from a decade before that. And they showed that in the modern nets, the accuracy improved substantially, but they were also far more confident. They tended to choose classes with higher probability. And while the modern ResNet type nets reduced error compared to the old school CNNs, they weren't as well calibrated. So this is called a reliability diagram, which basically bins up the predictions based on their confidence. So you have the outputs with the lowest confidence in this bin, the outputs with the higher confidence in this bin, and then they're measuring the accuracy in each of these bins. So if the classifier is perfectly calibrated, the model's output should be basically lined up. These bins should be lined up with the diagonal. But we see in the sort of ResNet style nets, there's quite a large gap between the accuracy and the expected, so the diagonal where a well-calibrated classifier would be. And so this is a concern, not just in biodiversity, but in any real-world decision-making systems, where we really want the network to be aware of what it knows and be able to reliably indicate when they're likely to be incorrect. Now, some good news is that these experiments were revisited in 2021 by a group at Google Brain, and they showed that in more modern architectures like Vision Transformers and MLP Mixer, these classifiers tend to be better off-the-shelf calibrated than CNNs. Now, they've demonstrated results mostly on standard class balance data sets like ImageNet, and then we've spent some time trying to show that this holds for long-tailed recognition as well. And we have results showing that these more modern architectures tend to be better calibrated. Okay, so what can you do with well-calibrated nets? Well, I mentioned that something we might be interested in producing are these set-valued classifiers. So set-valued classifiers permit you to yield with a classifier a set of candidate classes instead of a single class output, which is typically the one that has maximum softmax value. And so to get a little bit formal, we're outputting something that looks very much like a multi-label prediction problem. But the key difference here is that the generative model doesn't change from a standard classification. There's still a single correct label attached to each input X. We're just producing a set of candidate labels instead of a single label. And our objective here is to achieve low risk, meaning we want to have low probability that the true label will not be part of the set that we output. And so, as I mentioned before, the set value classifiers don't change the underlying data generation process as it would with multi-label classification. There's still a single label with each input. And so it's popular to design these plugin methods which can adapt a pre-trained multi-class classifier to the set valued setup. And it's a straightforward approach that you're all familiar with, I'm sure, is to provide top K candidates. This is a widely used metric in benchmarks like ImageNet. But what some of you might know is that there's really no reason to predict a fixed number of classes for every input. Certain inputs might be more challenging than others. And so in many cases, particularly in fine-grained classification, it's possible to achieve a more informative prediction by relaxing this hard constraint that says you have to always look at the top 5 or you have to look at the top 10 and allow for a variable number of size in your outputs. Okay, so some of you might now be thinking, well, why don't you just output 1,000 if there's 1,000 classes and have a ginormous set size? And of course, you could do this and have low risk, but it's not a very useful classifier. So most of these known set valued methods attempt to trade off these two quantities, the error rate that the true class does not appear in the output set versus the set size. And so there's an excellent review paper or survey paper on set valued classification by Shazan and colleagues. And these are some plots from that paper that show on various data sets, like from MNIST, ImageNet, and then a biodiversity focus on plant clef, the trade-off between the average set size and the average error rate. So what we'd like to see optimally are curves that are towards the bottom left of these plots. And so we can see in the case of ImageNet and plant clef, the blue line corresponding to an average control classifier clearly dominates. And what these average control classifiers allow is that it allows for individual points to violate constraints either on the error or the size, and this flexibility can improve the overall trade-off. So basically, you're going to allow, you might set a size, so you want on average your set sizes to be output by the classifier to be no greater than 5 on average, but for individual inputs, you might allow some of them to have a set size of 10 if the model is really uncertain. And then the size of the set becomes basically a different type of uncertainty that the model is able to produce. Now, I was mentioning calibration, and this is because these set valued methods rely on these probabilities that are being output by these classifiers to form these confidence sets. And so the methods that these trade-off error rate and set size really rely on having well-calibrated output probabilities. So again, this is some figures from this survey paper showing that if you just work with the original uncalibrated probabilities, in the median, you are going to be respecting your theoretical constraint that you have on your, in this case, the point-wise error rate. So we talked about the risk before, the probability that your output is, the ground truth output is not present in the set. You want to have a guarantee on something like that. But if you look at on the uncalibrated case, the percentiles, particularly for the higher percentiles here, you see they're occasionally exceeding this theoretical constraint. Whereas if you calibrate your probabilities, you're generally, even your error bars here are falling under the curve, and doing additional correction ensures even further margin away from this theoretical constraint. So here that you have an expected constraint on your point-wise error rate, and that matches up to your measured error rate in practice. And so another point here is that this set value setting is a nice test bed for model calibration. There's many researchers that are working on different ways of recalibrating models or yielding different confidence scores out of models. This is a nice way to put these to use and assess their utility in these visual recognition architectures. Now, one of the data sets we are often working with on long-trailed recognition and distribution shift and fine-grained recognition is PlantNet. And this is part of the NeurIPS data sets and benchmarks track a couple of years ago. And the data set exhibits strong class imbalance and also this problem that many species are visually similar. So in data sets that you're likely familiar with, for example, ImageNet, you'll notice that there are visually dissimilar images belonging to the same class. And in the case of PlantNet, you might be looking at the leaves versus the flowers. But we're all familiar with this type of problem, and generally our visual recognition architectures can deal with this issue. However, outside of mainstream computer vision, we don't often see this other problem, and I referred to this before as sort of the aleatoric uncertainty, where visually similar images belong to two completely different classes. So here, PlantNet images are labeled by plant species, and you have the same, or sorry, two different species with extremely visually similar images, makes it challenging for both automated systems and humans to identify them. Up here on the top is really just showing you the long-tail nature of the data. This is an alternative way of looking at it, but basically you have 80% of the species in the data set only representing 11% of the total images. So the images are mostly dominated by a few frequent classes. So it's definitely a long tail data set. And this leads to difficulties. So if you report just top one accuracy, where you average your accuracy over all the images in the test set, then you actually look like you have reasonable performance, whether you're using CNNs or VITs. But if you take an alternative view, use a different metric called macro average top one accuracy, where you average within the classes first before computing a final average, you see that performance drops. So really what's happening in top one is the performance is being dominated by those few species that are well represented in the training set. But for other species, the model is just not performing very well. And we can see this here at top right, when we look for images that have greater than 2,000 examples in the training set, we're doing well over 0.9 accuracy, but the ones that are represented only 0 to 10 times, we're doing quite poorly. So compared to ImageNet, where human performance is exceeded now by machine learning classifiers, we're still not able to beat trained botness in this domain. So this is error rate, where you see the botness is having a significantly lower error than a number of different CNN architectures. So we've looked at this PlantNet data set, particularly using these set valued classifiers, and we've found that we can scale up to PlantNet, and we are seeing that these vision transformers compared to CNN architectures are coming better calibrated off the shelf. One other thing that we've noticed, which is interesting, is that these data efficient image transformers, sort of a variation of VITs that were proposed recently. I should have a citation here. This is Hugo Touvron and colleagues from Meta. This architecture is actually giving quite a much better yield than standard VITs. And really, this is just changing the training recipe. And what we see is when we're looking at sort of both top one and top five at a macro level, it's significantly outperforming. And then there's another metric here, the macro average five. So this is using the variable size sets that are output to compute the average error. And we see that actually we're still getting better performance and sort of more attractive when we measure it this way. So in the frequentist statistics community, there's also been a set of methods called conformal prediction emerge. And these methods turn heuristic notions of uncertainty into more reliable ones through a post-training or post-hoc adjustment, similar to the methods that we explored earlier for set-valued classification. And these can be used to build set-valued classifiers that have these safety guarantees, something called coverage, basically one minus this risk that your ground truth label is not contained in your sets on average. And the CP methods can be used to build these set-valued classifiers, but the framework is actually more general than that. So they can be used for other tasks, including regression and time series prediction. And it's taken them some time to gain traction in the machine learning and vision community, but they are picking up. though they remain largely untested in modern architectures and in the settings like train test distribution shift and long tail label distributions that we tend to find in biodiversity and the sorts of things that people at this workshop are interested in. So we've investigated in my group, evaluating these conformal prediction methods in these settings, and we've considered a number of recently proposed techniques. So the threshold conformal prediction and the adaptive prediction sets are very much like the set value methods that we explored earlier. One of them basically thresholds probability. So basically keeps on adding items with a certain probability to the confidence sets until you've sort of exhausted all probabilities over some threshold. And that threshold is chosen by this post hoc calibration procedure. Adaptive prediction sets, what it does is it basically accumulates probability. So it sorts all the classes based on the, say, the softmax output of the model and incrementally adds them until you've got a certain amount of cumulative probability. And this leads to more robust coverage at the expense of larger sets. And the regularized adaptive predictive sets basically tries to strike a trade-off between the two of them by having this regularization penalty. And this gives basically reduced set size compared to the APS algorithm. And so these first three methods are all post hoc procedures where we don't touch the training procedure at all, but you can go a step further in a couple of works, including this one by Stutz and colleagues, go beyond this post hoc calibration by optimizing conformal prediction during learning. So it's basically making the learning process conformal aware. And we've tested ResNets and vision transformers and also these data efficient image transformers that I mentioned before. And it turns out that these deep models are quite useful. For those of you familiar with the original VIT paper, to match CNN level performance, they had to use a much larger data set, specifically ImageNet 21K. But the deep paper has shown that by following a carefully designed training procedure, you can match or even exceed CNN performance by using standard ImageNet training data. And this model tends to shine in these biodiversity settings as well. There's two things we looked at. One was distribution shift. We start with the ImageNet trained model, and then we look at various alternative test sets. So ImageNet v2 is the closest to the original ImageNet set. And it's been set up with the goal of mimicking the original data distribution. The ImageNet C, where C stands for common visual corruptions, it applies Gaussian noise, motion blur, brightness, and contrast corruptions. There's also ImageNet A, which has naturally adversarial images that are incorrectly classified by a ResNet 50, but correctly classified by humans. And then the ImageNet R, which are these rendered versions of ImageNet classes, such as drawings and cartoons. And so basically we take a model and then we basically do a conformal prediction and measure two things. We measure the coverage. So again, this is the probability that this is on the y-axis, the probability that the true class is present in your confidence sets that you output versus the inefficiency. And the inefficiency is the average set size here. And we show if we set a target coverage for doing the calibration of 0.9, these models will stick. When we measure on normal ImageNet test set, these models will respect this guarantee, which we get from conformal prediction, that the true label will be in our sets on average 0.9% of the time. Now, different models will get different set sizes on average, with the ConvNets and having larger sets and therefore not as being as good models as the VIT flavors. But the main point here is that as soon as we make tiny changes to the distribution at test time, even ImageNet v2, which are similar images to ImageNet, we lose these guarantees from our conformal prediction. So we see in the yellow, this is ImageNet v2, basically dropping our guarantee by about 10% on average. And then with the larger scale corruptions, like the renders and the adversarial examples, we see much further loss in coverage, and also much larger set sizes, and then therefore weaker inefficiency in general. So basically, target coverage is consistently violated for every single distribution shifted set. The other aspect that we looked at beyond the distribution shifting was with long tail labels. So we go back to PlantNet 300K and again set a marginal coverage rate of 0.9, and then look specifically at macro averages. So we're looking class by class how these models do based on the coverage and the inefficiency. Sorry, I've got some noise outside my window. I'm just going to shut my window and close it just a second. All right, nice day outside. Thought I could have some fresh air, but it was a little bit noisy. So, okay. So looking at the long-tailed setting, when we see various architectures, ResNets versus DEEP versus VIT, the first thing that we notice, once again, is the DEEP model tends to outperform on a macro average top one sense. This is what we saw previously when we were looking at set valued classifiers. But what we didn't look at before is going into a sort of per class or a class conditional coverage. So again, we set a guarantee of 0.9 on average across the data set, but when we look at class by class on PlantNet, we have a lot of coverage violations. And so then we go to inefficiency and look at something similar. We look at these are the average set sizes. Again, when we take the average across all the classes, looks decent. We know that APS leads to higher class sizes, but when we look at a macro level, we do the averaging within the classes. We say, in some cases, huge set sizes for some of the classes, leading to big averages on a per class level. And then on the right, we see the actual number and percentage of classes that have violated the coverage guarantee. And so this is, in almost all cases, more than half of the classes in the data set are violating the guarantees we thought we were getting from conformal prediction. Okay, so I've mostly been talking about images so far, but I'm going to make a slight deviation over to these DNA barcodes I mentioned before. And something we've been looking at along this pipeline I discussed is once you've computed these barcodes from the images and you want to match them against a database and identify them taxonomically, can you do this with in a calibrated way and in a reliable way? And so we've been working with this probabilistic taxonomic classifier, or PROTAX for short. And the idea here is that we have a known taxonomy. This is sort of a biology review for some of you, maybe back to high school, but you've got a root and you have sort of different levels of taxonomic specificity. So for example, family and genus and species at the most granular level. And in the database, only some of these nodes are populated with reference sequences, meaning we have a physical specimen, we sequenced it, we've extracted these barcodes, and now they sit at these different nodes. So each of these nodes at this level up here would represent different families. Some of them have these sequences attached to them as references. And then we have certain genera. Again, some of them have variable number of sequences associated with them. And then we can go right down to species level. And at this stage, most of these will be extremely sparse at this level. And we also want to account not just for species that are present in the taxonomy, those are the known species, but as I mentioned before, we could have species present in the taxonomy that lack references, unknown taxonomic units, like you see mentioned over here, and even reference sequences that might be incorrectly taxonomically identified. So things go wrong in this very manual human effort with the sequencing and the taxonomic identification by experts and the insertion into the database. And so occasionally you'll have sequences that are actually attached to the wrong nodes. And so how can you build a classification system that's robust? And so PROTAX, algorithm that we've been working with has been successfully applied to characterizing samples against a reference database of tens of thousands of sequences. And these have been sort of at the national scale, like all of the fungi of Finland or all the insects of a particular region. But we want to use this at a global scale. So we need reference libraries that are at least 2 orders of magnitude greater. And this presents computational challenges and complicates taxonomic placement because larger databases tend to contain a greater number of erroneous barcodes. So if we compare this to standard classification, if we consider a total of 490,836 classes at the finest granularity, 7.4 million are very noisy samples, many of which are very weakly labeled. So you'll see the number of reference sequences dropping considerably. And so we've developed a scalable version of this ProTex that can leverage this global barcode of life data system that has several specimens with barcodes as a reference database. And our implementation right now is running real time on a single GPU. And most of the work so far has been done on the engineering side, so efficient computation of distances, because ProTex is effectively a nearest neighbor type algorithm that has a parametric component. Instead of sort of a simple voting mechanism that we often use for KNN classification, it has a learned sort of head on it that can output calibrated probabilities at each of the taxonomic levels. And so it basically turns this nearest neighbor procedure into probabilistic assignments. And so in the future, we are currently using exact nearest neighbor techniques and want to move these to approximate nearest neighbor methods that have seen quite a lot of use in the vision community, and also using learned representations of barcodes. So just to give you a picture of our progress optimizing this ProTex system, we started originally with a C implementation and moved to JAX pretty early on to leverage the GPU. And so in this 40K reference library that we've been using to test both speed and accuracy, we've got the timing down for a single query down to 1.52 milliseconds. And the latest JAX version basically uses custom CUDA operations within JAX to compute the distance to the K nearest neighbors, which is basically the main bottleneck. And we've shown, this is just at a larger scale on synthetic data, a synthetic reference library, we're seeing roughly linear speed up, going up to 7 million reference barcodes, which is the size of our target reference library. And moreover, with the memory optimizations that we've done, we're quite certain that even at the larger reference library side, everything can still be done directly in memory on a single GPU. And so far, I've talked about images and DNA barcodes, these projects separately. And so for the very short remainder of the talk, I'm going to put these together and highlight opportunities to leverage both images and DNA data. So the life plan group I'm working with image the catch from these malaise traps in bulk. And so here each sample is meta-barcoded. This is kind of like a DNA barcode soup. And we don't have one-to-one correspondence between the individuals in the image and the barcodes, but we know now to a reasonable degree of certainty for each image which classes are present because we have these from the barcodes. So this is a very interesting case of a weak label. A fraction of the bulk images also have these individual arthropods imaged. So this is another interesting problem for domain shift, where we try to use these individual chaos images to help us with the bulk recognition of these insect individuals. At NeurIPS 2021, I also ran into a group from Purdue who were using barcodes. And this is the first time at a mainstream vision or machine learning conference I'd seen anybody using this barcode of life database. This model can classify samples of both described and undescribed species. So for described species, they're assigned a species exactly where undescribed samples are popped up a higher level to genus. And this is an advancement over open set approaches that just identify unknown species as outliers. This actually attempts to cluster them within the genera. And so the main thrust of this paper is showing whether image information can be leveraged to improve the accuracy of a DNA barcode classifier. And you can see that images alone do very poorly even on scene classes.
You are a little bit out of time. Can we use like 5 minutes to wrap it up, please?
Oh, I will wrap it up for sure. Maybe like 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so the bioinformatics pipeline is much improved, particularly for the scene classes. But when you combine the DNA and the bioinformatics information, you can see that on a sort of a harmonic mean level across the seen and the unseen classes, you actually get better performance in either of the modalities or alone. And so this is the first paper I'm aware of. This is a follow-up to the NeurIPS 2021 work, but the first paper that I'm aware of that combines these DNA barcodes with imagery and shows that they're complementary. Now, I would just point out that they're working on around 30,000 insect images from 1,000 described species. And so recently we've looked at scaling this to a much larger database that has taxonomic classification, DNA barcodes, and a barcode index number for around 1.1 million insect specimens. And these are the specimens I was showing before that are from Canon's microscope. We create baselines for order and family level classification, but really I think that the most interesting uses of this data set will be for taxonomic classification methods. And so I am in wrapping it up now, last slide, just to recap, ML for biodiversity yields many interesting technical problems that inspire us as researchers. And really we'd like to drive desired future behaviors in the ecosystem. And some of these have been brainstormed with a working group working with the consulting firm Accenture to just sort of describe a future in which everyone is considerate and thinking about biodiversity in our daily lives. So with that, thanks a lot for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions if we've got time.
Yeah, please come ahead if you have any questions. Okay, actually, Graham, I have a question on this.
Sure.
I can totally tell this is something that I haven't really seen like in computer vision work a lot in terms of the areas of focus of the data set. So I'm wondering, are you picturing, or what do you think about the recent development on large language models on this biodiversity data set? Do you think there's a chance that there's going to be an improvement, or yeah, what do you think on that? Thank you.
Right, so I'll just repeat the question asking about large language models and whether they could be used for these biodiversity applications. I have had some discussions with colleagues in this community, and I think they are valuable in that a lot of the knowledge about various taxa are documented and cataloged in databases that are available in text. And so if we want to think of maybe leveraging learning visual attributes of very fine-grained species, I think a lot of this could be unlocked by accessing LLMs. And so, yeah, just in short, I think there's a great opportunity here. That's from the language side, but I think we can also take sort of architecturally what we're learning from large language models, and that, you know, say training on text and port this over to training for genomics, which is also going to be a totally other way of, you know, not directly using LLMs, but using the knowledge for building LLMs and all the techniques that have been used to, you know, fine tune them and do parameter efficient tuning and updates and so forth. So I think there's a lot to be leveraged from the LLM boom, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any questions? Okay, then there seems to be no further questions. Let's thank Dr. Graham Taylor again for this wonderful talk. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to our next talk. Next talk, we have a paper or presentation on improved cross-domain detection with self-supervised learning. I think the first author.
Yeah, so.
Okay, yeah. So the first author, Kelly, will do the presentation.
You want to share your screen?
It's
Oh, I think it's the, okay. Let's just check it.
Oh.
Oh, I see. Sorry. I just need to make sure that they're. No. Yeah.
So the mic will meet. It's not.
Yeah, we need to, I just need to make sure that I. Okay, so I can't get it to get the screen because this will get the. Okay, we can just do this. Should be fine. Okay, I think it should be fine. We can. Sorry, like, I'm not sure if.
Just do something.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Do you hear? Yeah. Okay.
Hey, yeah, thanks. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kylie. I'm a researcher from NEC Labs. And so today I'm going to introduce our work about improving cross-domain detection with self-supervised learning. This work is joined with NEC Labs and Adobe and the Northeastern University. Uh-huh. Oh, it's fine. Okay. Yeah, so the problem of cross-domain detection is to learn an adaptive of the detection model using labeled source data and non-labeled target data. So existing methods will adopt this learning paradigm where they optimize a joint loss with the standard detection loss with the label source image and the domain alignment loss using both the data from two domains. And typically the adversary alignment loss is used. In this paper, we propose a new solution to this problem. Our solution is orthogonal with the ECCD method, where we apply self-supervised learning tasks in both domains simultaneously to help align domains. In concept, we are kind of like project data from both domains to a shared self-supervised learning task space. And in that space, we do the alignment. So, so in each space, we optimize the task self-supervised learning task losses along with the detection loss and the domain alignment loss. So this figure shows the concept of our method. So at kind of like so before applying those tasks, this is the decision boundary is wrong because it's cross like it's cross the same category, and the ellipse the two ellipse indicate the decision boundaries of the two self-supervised tasks. So this shared self-supervised learning task push the class boundary towards the common directions across the domains. And it's kind of like after regularizing this the self-supervised learning task loss, we can regularize the decision boundary from the figure 1 to figure 3. So here is an overview of our method. We added two auxiliary tasks on top of existing cross-domain detector, and we apply both tasks on both domains simultaneously. So our method actually is quite simple. For an image, we apply the augmentation, and also we do the image rotation, and we send all the 3 views of the image to the detector, and we let all the 3 views to share the same set of region pulses to guarantee that
the three regions are exacted in different views. And with the region proposals, we calculated the loss for the two tasks. One is the rotation prediction loss with the region proposal, and the other is the consistency learning loss with the region proposals. Here shows more details. We rotate an image and predict the rotation angle based on the region proposal. So actually, this task help the detector to focus on the foreground regions, because as we can see from that here, the background, like the road, has less semantic information to help us to predict the rotation angle correctly. Only we can, based on the foreground region, this car, we can predict the rotation angle. Otherwise, if the bound box is located in background, we cannot do that correctly. And also we have consistency loss, and we apply strong computation on each image, and we generate a pseudo label with the original image. This is the original image, and with this we use the pseudo label to supervise kind of like pseudo ground truth to supervise the strongly augmented image, and in this way we kind of like enforce the consistency of the predictions. But therefore the model will like be more robust to changes in the image space. We also do a post-adaptation refinement. We based on the results, the model after applying the previous method, and we again apply strong augmentation on the target images, and we enforce detection consistency of the strongly augmented image and original image, and then we update the teacher model as the ensemble of the student model over time. So here the detection consistency will include both the classification consistency and the bounding box regression consistency. And here is the results. So we can apply our techniques on top of several existing cross-domain detection methods. This same method, this is baseline, and we can see that after applying our techniques, the performance can be consistently improved on top of different existing cross-domain detection methods. And we also study some alternative designs. We show that applying those self-supervised learning tasks on both domains get better performance than only apply those tasks on a single domain individually. And also we show that applying strong augmentation get better performance than applying weak augmentation. And here shows that a prediction rotation angle from the images get a worse result than prediction the angle from the region proposals. And so we also compare with state of the art. We add our stuff on top of a very old method, a well-established method, and we can see that our method can like lift the performance of this well-established method to the new level that is even better than the state-of-the-art methods on two data sets. Here is just some detection visualization. We can see that after applying our techniques, the detection results can be improved. So yeah, here is the summary. We first analyze why supervised learning tasks can help cross-domain detection, and also we propose a self-supervised learning framework-based framework that improve various cross-domain detection methods, and we achieve state-of-the-art performance by integrating our framework with an old, well-established method. Yep, thanks.
As well as any questions, just please go ahead and ask them. Okay, if no, let's thank the author again for the wonderful. I think our next event is a presentation on the challenge. We have I think the organizers, Jun Chen, to introduce the challenges and give us introduction on the first winners.
So I just need access to it. So I tried to. I send you request access to you.
Okay.
Can you copy them and send it to me again? Thank you.
So, let's start. Hello, everyone. This is Jun Chen. I'm a PhD student from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. My advisor is Mohammed Al-Hosseini. I'm happy to represent my team to this presentation. So now I will introduce our challenge. So its name is called long-tail visual relationship recognition. This is my team. So we have Arushi from University of Edinburgh, and Aniket from IIT Rookie, and me, and also my advisor, Mohammed Al-Hosseini from King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. So what is long-tail visual relationship recognition and why we need to study it? For visual relationship recognition, so it is a compositional problem. And so it is.
It looks like people in Zoom are seeing the previous presentation.
Oh, yeah.
So Graham should stop sharing.
No, it's not Graham. This is where is?
You have to stop. It's that red part. Yeah, that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No. So which one is it? So okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I start.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start from here. Okay. So for visual relationship recognition, it refers to recognize. Okay.
It says loading now. Okay, let's exit full screen.
We download this PPT to local.
I think maybe we have to first do the full screen.
Okay.
Can you go back to slideshow? Yeah. And now let's go to Zoom. There. Is it this one?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's working.
Yeah. Sorry again.
Okay. So visual relationship recognition, it is a task to recognize the relation between one subject and one object. For long-tail visual relationship recognition, it is to detect the relation, for those very infrequent relations. So those relations might, very rare in the real world, or maybe rare like for those subject and object.
to take this as an example in this image. So given the AI models, we can recognize this subject of the dog and also the subject of a house. So for AI model, it is very difficult to recognize the dog is writing a house relation. It is very difficult because there's very few such examples in the training data. And so also like for this dog and a house, they are very common objects. So we can see there's some very long tail with relationships. And also there's many like tail subjects and also tail objects. For example, the rhino and the gorilla. If we study the relation, of those long tail objects, and so it can be more complex and also more difficult to predict their relation. These are some other rare visual relationship examples. In the left one, it is a parrot riding a bicycle. In the right part is a monkey riding a dog. So given these two images, so the current AI model can recognize this is a parrot, this is a bicycle, a monkey, and dog. They are very common in the real world. But if you need to recognize their relationships, it can be very challenging because you have never seen, or maybe only seen maybe one or two such examples in the training data. So it's difficult to predict like for AI model. In order to study and also analyze this long-tail visual relationship recognition problem, so we have introduced these two benchmarks. The first one is VG8K LT benchmark. The second one is a GQA LT benchmark. For the VG8K LT, it contains 5,300 objects and 2,000 unique visual relations. It's built up from the visual genome dataset. For GQALT, it contains 1,700 different objects and 310 unique visual relationships. It's built up from GQA datasets. If you want to know more details about these two benchmarks, you can scan this QR code. So let's look at the data distribution for these two datasets. So we have illustrated the distribution for subjects and relationships and also objects. So from this figure, you can see how long tail it is. So let's take the relationship of the VGLK LT as one example. So for the top frequent relations, you can see it contains nearly like hundreds of thousands examples. But for the tail classes, it contains only very few number of examples, maybe 10 or 5. So when you predict the long tail classes with this data sets, it can be very challenging for current AI models. In order to better study and also analyze the long tail performance, so we break down the data into many, medium, and few. For many, we selected the top 5 most frequent classes. For medium, we selected the middle frequent 15 classes, and for tail, it's just the other 80% infrequent classes. And then we ask the AI model to predict the performance for each category. Regarding the evaluation metrics, we use the average per class accuracy to evaluate the model performance. We have 2 metrics. The first one is the relation O per class. It is the per class relationship classification performance and averaged across all relationship types. For subject object O per class, it is a per class subject and object classification performance averaged across all object types. In our challenge, we have provided all the open source code and data to the participants. So finally, there are overall 5 submissions in our leaderboard. We selected one winner based on their performance on these 2 benchmarks. So here's the result. In these 2 benchmarks, so there's one winner team, which is Gavin Wang. Their team has achieved the best performance on both benchmarks. So he's the winner of our challenge. Yes, so congrats to the winner. and the winner is from the team from in Shanghai Technology University and also Shanghai Jiaotong University. The first author is Chen Yu Wang, second author is Shuo Wang, and the last author is Sheng Hua Gao. So today they cannot physically come to the CVPR, but they have pre-recorded the video to demonstrate their idea. And I think the first author is also like in the Zoom. So if you later on, if you have any questions, you can ask him.
Just
Hello, everyone. I'm Chu.
Sharing the
University. Today, I'm to write out.
sharing on screen.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's a red there. And now again.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, using transformer is actually condition for visual relationship recognition. Yes, so we reveal the task of visual relationship recognition, which aims to predict the relationships between subjects and objects, while considering that there exists a long-term distribution compared to the single object recognition task. This task is different to its volitional nature, especially when getting results of categories. Furthermore, the data set may use an recognition as illustrated in the image. The dog is riding on a horse. Previous works on long-term distribution recognition demonstrated that the final classification components of the model depends on two aspects: representation quality and classifier quality. The motivation behind our work is to improve the quality of both aspects in order to enhance the overall model performance. For improving the representation quality, we validate different methods on three aspects, which are global representation, local representation, and positional representation. For improving the classifier quality, we consider applying effective sampling strategy, decoupling classifier, and weighted loss function. This is the pattern of our approach. First, we input the images into a vision transformer network and use the MLA module to obtain features for the subjects and objects. Then we construct a broad neural network that learns the representation of pairwise relationships given the subject-object pairs. Next, we incorporate the transformer module to define the relationship features. Finally, the refined triplet features are separately input into the corresponding classifiers to obtain the predicted categories. We will provide detailed explanations for each step afterwards. Compared to ResNet and which networks, vision transformers has more powerful feature representation ability. However, the VIT runs in a different way compared with other traditional networks. So if directly using ROI only or ROI alone, it is not suitable to extract the features. A recent work proposed a module for masking with overlap error, as shown in the diagram on the right. This module calculates the overlap region between the given region and the region patch. The normalized values are then inputted into the intention map. This experimental results have demonstrated the effectiveness of this approach. After extracting features for subjects and objects, we adopted a special condition graph to the pairwise relation feature representation, as shown at the bottom. We applied a parrot graph using parrot features as
small features. The initial features are based on the previous sample module. We also construct as special encodings as AG features. Through a message passing algorithm, we can ultimately characterize the connectivity of the file. We found that with directly constructing such a characteristics graph would result in many more relation subject pairs. To alleviate the noise bias towards that data, we propose a negative samples reduction strategy, in which we first calculate the minimum errors in the branches subject object pairs and all possible gaps. Then ranking the IOU value to set out the first 50 samples. Then we provide the very small module proposed into REST1. This module refines the features machines and it will step by considering the global index of the scene. Finally, the refined features are input into the corresponding classifiers to obtain class logics. Now let's move on to our experimental section. We conducted experiments on two data sets, which is a long time and GQA. This data set will derived from the original data sets with certain process. It can be observed that which is is relatively more complex. As for the evaluation metrics, we shape the accuracy of these states. Many meaning and field based on the sample frequency as well as the overall accuracy across both categories. We define our model with a long-tail function with the first entropy. Our method has demonstrated superior performance on which APK long-tail, especially for the future categories. We will observe significant performance improvements in both subject, object, and relation predictions, especially the achieves 23.4 forecast accuracy, outperforming the previous test by 4.4%. Regarding reality, our experimental results compared to the transformer, which is contrary to the theoretical expectations. In fact, due to the limitation in our current computational resources, we were unable to match the parameter settings of the original paper, including the network between apples. However, on the other hand, our experimental performance shows some improvements compared to another RS value. We conducted extensive calculation studies on which APK long-term extent is the more challenging. For this, recent effective is relatively 16 and obviously improve the relation on all settings. By using singular transformer, plans can be further improved. Moreover, experimental loss in ability to demonstrate the effectiveness of negative samples reduction. The couple classifier and with loss function for improving classifier budget. In conclusion, in this work, we explored different methods for improving the recommendation and classifier and also that are important for the long-tail classification task. We also demonstrate the efficient transformers of powerful backbone and resistance. Also, the transformer is effective for this task. Last but not the least, we are further protected using clean text encoder for improving the classifier quality. Thank you for listening.
Do you have any questions? Okay.
If there's no any questions, let's thanks the authors again, and also thanks the presentation of the Chinese organizers.
Showing you some, so that you can see what. Okay,
Oh.
so you click on that.
Yeah, let's open it here. Okay.
All the way to the end.
Then stop share.
Okay.
It's working.
Yeah.
No,
This is
no,
the first slide. You
Yeah.
It's like Black Mirror. Yeah.
There you go.
But I think when you, can you do slideshow? I think it's not showing. Can you do
Yeah,
slideshow? No, it's not showing.
What?
Can we do it without slideshow?
Yeah.
No, I think the slideshow and then
Didn't work. It was all black.
the slideshow.
You can stop share and then
Yeah,
do slideshow and then reshare.
yeah, the slideshow. I'm now stop sharing and share again, and
Yeah.
it will work. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
These are the closing remarks and rewards announcements, so it will take a few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you guys for being an awesome audience. A lot of great questions came out of you. And very interactive. This is a picture I took like, this afternoon. I would like also to thank all the speakers. They gave us amazing content about few-shot learning, meta-learning, and so on. Also want to say I would like to thank the reviewers. We had more than 100 reviewers who did a very good job at finding which papers were quality and which papers maybe were not that quality. And also, there was an incident of ChatGPT being used to generate reviews. So it was quite interesting. I would like to thank the organizers. There has been a lot of work that has been done at the backstage, trying to take care of all the logistics and making sure we get all the speakers, make sure we get the diversity right, the location, and so on. So a lot of work were put in there. And finally, we're going to have the social event. So it's going to start now. We are just going to stay here until like 5:30 p.m. just to gather people here, and then we're connected to the kind of place. So we're just going to be walking until Coffee 93. It's just a small hike, 20-minute walk. Rain is not so bad. If you have an umbrella or even just a jacket will work. But it's a very, very nice place. It's the place where I host all my board game events and birthdays and so on. So it's going to have a lot of fun. So yeah, just stick around here. I'm going to walk there. Probably there will be other people who are going to join us there. Because I invited some people outside CVPR who are interested to meet researchers like you. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I encourage you to like talk with each other and make groups so that you can share the research. Thank you. Ah, the awards is now. Sorry. There's still an award. I thought the award is before.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, there's a awards. One paper award then.
Yeah, as you know, our workshop accepted 30 English papers this year, and we select one out of them as our best papers. And the best paper goes to Jin Shen from University of Oxford. Sorry, I may pronounce your name wrong. Okay, and this year we had Irene Saradaki from Brass AI. She's a research director of the research partner to give the reward to the winner. Yeah, will you please sit in center? So yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All
I
good?
think we can,
Oh,
close it. Yeah.
maybe I can sit on that.
You close it.
Maybe there we have the light.
Yeah, it's kind of in our eyes. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you very much for organizing the one.
Okay.
That's all right. Take a picture. You guys want to take a picture?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So we can ask someone.
Yeah, maybe everyone who wants to join the picture also.
Yeah, please join us.
Yeah. Sure.
So Mohammed.
Anyone can join. Go for it.
Yeah, more the better.
No
Please
worries,
come.
no worries.
Yeah.
More the merrier. Yeah, go.
More the better. Please come.
It only happens once a year.
3, 2, 1.
Cheers.
Tired. 3, 2, 1. There you go.
Sweet.
Volunteer.
Oh, thank you.
I'm not sure that I told you the events.
Yeah, that's.
Thanks everyone in Zoom for attending the workshop. Gonna stop recording and close the Zoom.